Chapter 897. At the beginning of the play, there was a cliffhanger. Do Tianzhang, a shiozai in Chuzhou City, owed Granny Kai 40 taels of silver, so he had to sell his 7-year-old daughter, Do Yi, to Granny Kai as a child bride. Do Tianzhang received 10 taels of silver from Granny Kai for traveling expenses, and then went to the capital city to take the exam. There were not many highlights in this cliffhanger, but the actors on the stage were excellent, and the plot was smooth. It was quite enjoyable to watch, so the audience was not disappointed. That little Duanyan is quite good at acting at such a young age. You don't know. They have been trained in this field since they were young. Since they can go on the stage, you can't find any fault with them. That's true. But since this play is called Do Yi's Injustice, I don't know what the injustice is. What's the hurry? It's just the beginning. Let's keep watching. Because of the popularity of the Justice Bao series, people were very fond of this kind of drama. Who wouldn't like to redress the grievances of the people? Soon, they found out why Do Yi had been wronged. The Kai family moved, Do Yi's husband died early, and she and her mother-in-law depended on each other. Then, they were framed by evil people and happened to meet a corrupt official. Do Yi had no choice but to confess and admit the crime in order to save her mother-in-law from being tortured. She was sentenced to death and sent to the execution ground. According to the usual practice of the play, this was the most exciting part of the play. This corrupt official deserves to die. This daughter-in-law is so filial. She is willing to bear the injustice in order to save her mother-in-law. Where is Lord Bao? Why isn't he here? Quickly reverse the verdict for Do Yi. Have you ever seen a play before? How could Lord Bao show up at this time? It was Guard Zhan who descended from the sky and shouted, "Spare her life." Finally, someone couldn't help but remind them. Brothers, are you two acting? Really? Isn't that Justice Bao? Back to the stage. Do Yi had been sent to the execution ground. Two voices rang in the audience's ears, like a huge bell. Breaking the law for no reason, not being on guard against being punished by the Constitution, the cry was earth-shattering. In an instant, wandering souls went to the Sanluo temple. How could they not blame the heaven and earth? Good people suffer poverty and have a shorter life, while evil people enjoy wealth and have a longer life. Heaven and earth. He acted as if he was afraid of the strong and bullied the weak, but it turned out that this was also how he pushed the boat with the current. You're the earth, yet you can't tell good from bad. Heaven, you are wrong to judge the virtuous and foolish to be heaven. As soon as these two sentences were spoken, everyone's hearts immediately sank. They seemed to feel that the injustice Do Yi had suffered had reached the point where even heaven and earth resented her. At this time, the executioner said, "Death is at hand, what else do you have to say?" Do Yi said, "I want a clean banquet. When I, Do Yi, stand up, I want Zhang, 2 white ropes to hang on the spear. If I, Do Yi, am really wronged, my head will fall wherever the knife passes. My hot blood will not stain the ground, it will all fly to the white silk. Now is the hottest time of the year. If Do Yi is really wronged, after she dies, 3 feet of auspicious snow will fall from the sky and cover her corpse. I, Do Yi, died a wronged death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer from drought for 3 years." Do Yi's voice was sorrowful as she made 3 wishes in a row. Blood stains the white silk, blood splatters in June, 3 years of drought. The crowd was silent, and no one was talking anymore. The executioner shouted angrily, "The time has come, execute her." In the middle of the stage, the executioner swung the knife down, and Do Yi fell to the ground. Her blood sprayed into the air and splashed on the white silk. At this moment, more than half of the people in the audience couldn't help but stand up. Blood stains on the white silk, it was indeed blood stains on the white silk. Do Yi's first wish had come true. On the stage, the executioner quietly made a hand gesture, and a board rose up from where a piece of the stage was missing, and the stage became seamless again. Right at this moment, someone below suddenly shivered and murmured, "Why do I feel that the surroundings are chilly?" Someone couldn't help but wrap his arms around himself. Although the weather was hot, there were ice mirrors everywhere. Even if it wasn't hot, it wouldn't be cold. Someone suddenly felt a chill in his nose, and he couldn't help but touch his nose, only to find that it was wet. When he raised his head, he discovered that there were actually white snowflakes falling from the sky. Is it snowing? How is that possible? It's summer now, and we are in a brothel. Above everyone's heads, on the thick beam, someone was standing there, gently shaking the bamboo basket in his hand, and extremely fine ice shards were scattered down from above. When everyone looked back to the stage, Do-E's body had already been buried under the snow. As the tragic music became clearer, the lines of the opera surfaced in everyone's mind. I don't want half a star of blood spilled in the mortal world, it's all in the air. If I have a heart full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers roll like a brocade, so that my body won't be revealed. Do-E died an unjust death. From now on, Chuzhou City will suffer a drought for 3 years. This time, there was no bodyguard John, no justice Bao, and Do-E was executed. The vows she made before her death were fulfilled one by one. Blood splashed on the white silk, and snow fell in June. According to common sense, this was impossible. Even heaven and earth were touched by her grievances, and her wish was fulfilled. 3 years later, Do-E's father, Do Tianzhong, would reverse the verdict for her and clear her name. However, at this moment, the atmosphere in the brothel was getting out of control. On the stage, the performers who were about to start their performance had no choice but to stop. Below the stage, many people stared at the stage in a daze, and many had tears streaming down their cheeks. Do-E was unfortunate, and she was miserable. However, only a few of those who could sit and watch the show were from rich families. Their status was not much higher than Do-E's, and they were also bullied by all kinds of evil forces. This was Do-E's injustice, and it was also their injustice. The show could no longer go on, so the manager of the brothel announced that the last twist of Do-E's injustice would be postponed. When the audience walked out of the brothel, they felt that the scorching sun was not as hot as it used to be. Instead, they felt a chill down their spines. They were sweating, but it was cold sweat. What's wrong with you guys? Is the show over? Was it good? What's going on? Say something. The audience couldn't get any useful information from the people who had already walked out of the brothel. By then, the second show was about to begin, so they didn't have time to ask the audience questions. After a long time, the second group of people walked out of the brothel. An unjust case shocked the world, and snow fell in June. In just a few days, the play known as The Greatest Injustice of All Time had spread across the capital. All the other shows in the dozens of brothels in the capital had temporarily stopped, and only Do-E's Injustice was being rehearsed in every brothel. In the county government of the capital, County Magistrate Lu looked at the thick stack of papers in front of him and suddenly felt dizzy. He slumped in his chair and murmured, "How can there be so many unjust cases in the capital, right under the feet of the emperor?" Below, Arrestor Zhao showed a wry smile and said, "Lord Lu, don't complain. These days, it's the same everywhere in the county government. Chuzhou is our neighbor. The governor of Chuzhou and the magistrate of Shanyang County have been scolded badly. The people of the capital are filled with righteous indignation. Some people are even kneeling at the gate of the palace, begging the princess to investigate the case thoroughly and prove Do-E's innocence. This is just a play." County Magistrate Lu slammed the table angrily and said loudly, "But there are so many unjust cases, how can I investigate? Sir, this is really nothing. Think about it this way. In the play, if it wasn't the magistrate of Shanyang County, but the magistrate of the capital, shut up." County Magistrate Lu's face turned pale, and his whole body quivered. He suddenly bounced up from the chair and shouted, "Beat the drum, raise the court, I'm going to break 10 today." On the street in the capital, a man looked at the woman next to him and said pitifully, "My wife, believe me, I really lost my purse. I didn't keep a vixen outside." The woman said angrily with a face full of disbelief, "How dare you deny it? You have the smell of her perfume on you, do you think I can't smell it?" the man helplessly took out a bottle of perfume from his pocket and said, "This is the birthday gift I bought for you with the money I saved for a year," he said with a sad face. "How dare you suspect me of keeping a vixen outside? I am more innocent than Doe. What? You have a secret stash of money?" At the corner of the street, a woman chased after an 8 or 9-year-old child and said angrily, "You didn't go to school today, did you go to the brothel?" The child stopped and shook his head. "I didn't." "You are wrongly accusing me." The woman grabbed his arm. "How dare you lie to me? The teacher in school told me everything." "I really didn't." The child shook his head violently and said loudly, "Mother, you are wrongly accusing me. If I die of being wrongly accused, I will make my blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years in the capital. You are still denying it." The woman took off his pants on the street and slapped him a few times, saying as she slapped him, "I will make your blood splash on the brothel, snow in June, and drought for 3 years. Recently, there was a wind of crying injustice in the capital. Everyone, regardless of gender or age, called themselves Doe. When the brothel performed for free, there were even no pedestrians on the usually crowded streets. In addition, the government offices in each county were blocked by the people who appealed every day. The situation did not improve until the government suppressed several groups of troublemakers with a tough attitude. At this time, in front of the government office of the Ministry of Justice, a weak woman walked out of the crowd. After beating the big drum at the entrance of the government office, she knelt in front of the door and cried out in a sad voice, "Sir, I am wrongly accused." Chapter 898. Sir, I've been wronged. The woman knelt in front of the Ministry of Justice. Her voice was extremely sorrowful, as if she had a great grievance in her heart that she had nowhere to cry about. It drew the sidelong glances of passers-by. Recently, the common people had been filing complaints. It wasn't just the yamen of the various counties, but also the yamen of the capital, the Imperial Censorate, the Ministry of Justice, and even the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Rights, and Ministry of Works. As long as it was a yamen, it was unavoidable. After all, the number of yamens was limited, and there were many people. It was impossible for them all to gather together. Even if all the yamens in Jingdo were taken into account, there wouldn't be enough. This kind of situation had greatly hindered the normal operation of the yamen. Thus, the eldest princess quickly made an order based on the feelings of the people and the actual situation in Jingdo. Anyone who took the opportunity to purposely cause trouble and block the yamen would be severely punished as a warning to others. If there were truly any grievances, they should be filed in an orderly manner. The relevant yamen would deal with them one by one according to the urgency and severity of the case. Any grievances had to be tried, and any cases had to be reversed. The bottom line of the law was strictly observed, and the people were given a clear sky. With the eldest princess order, the vigorous anti-corruption cases among the people were temporarily eased. It didn't disappear. Instead, it went from disorder to order. Countless eyes were fixed on the various yamens in Jingdo. At this critical juncture, even the usually unbridled playboys in Jingdo were tightly restrained by their families. They were terrified that they would cause trouble and become targets in everyone's eyes. Even a small matter would be infinitely magnified to a point where their families couldn't bear it. The Ministry of Justice usually dealt with serious cases. Unless the emperor designated it, the main hall of the Ministry of Justice was usually closed, and complaints of grievances were not allowed in front of the Ministry of Justice. However, this time was different. Each county yamen was about to go crazy, and the Ministry of Justice couldn't be idle either. A bailiff had already come out from inside and kindly helped the woman up from the ground. He kindly asked her what grievances she had suffered and if she had a piece of paper. If she didn't, she could have a bailiff from the Ministry of Justice write one for free. From beginning to end, there wasn't much impatience on their faces. So many people were watching on the street. If one place wasn't handled well, the Ministry of Justice's reputation would be ruined. This was a special time. If something went wrong at this time, it would be strange if the minister didn't skin them alive. Soon, the woman was helped into the hall by a Ministry of Justice runner. Among the onlookers on the street, someone shook his head and said, "In terms of how they treat the common people, the officials of the Ministry of Justice are still the best. Unlike the governor's mansion. I heard that some time ago, someone went to the yamen to seek justice, but the people of the yamen didn't care. They even locked the person up for disturbing the yamen. Compared to the Ministry of Justice, the difference is obvious." "That's right." As soon as he finished speaking, someone else chimed in, "Unfortunately, I was also present at that time. It is said that the young lady's younger sister died. This is a murder case. The people at the capital's magistrate's office are really too careless. I heard that the young lady has been arrested several times." "What is the capital magistrate worried about?" Another person interrupted. "The one who went in just now seems to be the young lady. Why is she in the Ministry of Justice this time? There's such a thing?" Someone's face was filled with anger as he quickly walked towards the entrance of the Ministry of Justice. "If that's the case, I might have to take a look at this case." "I'm going too. Let's go together." At the entrance of the Ministry of Justice, the excited crowd was stopped by the yamen officials. However, they didn't stop them for long. After verifying their identities, someone specially led them in. Based on the principle of fairness and openness, when the Ministry of Justice was conducting a case, the common people were allowed to listen in. The Ministry of Justice claimed that there were laws to abide by, that the law was enforced strictly, and that those who violated the law would be punished. For some cases, the process of handling the case was completely transparent, which won many people's hearts. Of course, in order not to disturb the order of the case, the number of people listening in was still limited to 50. However, although most people couldn't see it with their own eyes, the various details of the case would be passed on through the mouths of these 50 people. In a short period of time, the news would spread throughout the entire capital. In the court, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, patted the gavel and asked, "Who are you? Where do you live? What are your grievances? Tell me slowly." The woman stood in the court and said softly, "Your Excellency, my name is Lin Qin. I live near the city gate of the capital. My younger sister is 16 years old. Her maiden name is Lin Shuangshuang. She used to be a musician at the Miaoying Pavilion. On the night of the 15th of the first month, today's court will be held by Lu Qingtian. This lady is really lucky this time. Every case handled by Lu Qingtian has been solved by him." "Not necessarily. It's very likely that the capital governor's residence will be involved in this case. However, I still believe in Lu Qingtian. In the past few years, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, had handled countless cases. No matter how well hidden the criminal was, there was no place for him to hide. This was because he often helped the people and solved ordinary cases. He was deeply loved and respected by the people of the capital. People gave him the nickname of Lu Qingtian. Lu Qingtian had the meaning of the Great Lord of Justice. It also overlapped with the fictional image of Justice Bao in the opera. This was the highest praise the people of the capital had for him. Inside the court, when the woman was complaining about her grievances, people outside the court had already understood. So this woman is Miss Shuangshuang's sister. Miss Shuangshuang's zither skills were unparalleled. It's a pity that she died young. That 100 birds pay homage to the phoenix will never be heard again. What a pity, what a pity. Didn't the capital governor's office say that it was the work of a criminal from the imperial court? Bullshit capital governor's office. One of the people who had been paying attention to the situation inside the court was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. He angrily said, "Listen, this lady only wanted to see Miss Shuangshuang's body, but the capital governor's office found a reason to arrest her. Later on, they used a few more reasons to lock her up in prison for almost half a year. If there's nothing fishy going on, I won't believe it even if I beat you to death." At this time, as the woman in the court explained, the case gradually became clear. According to the explanation given by the capital governor's office, on the night of the Upper Yuan dynasty, a criminal from the imperial court hid in the fine sound pavilion. After using extremely cruel methods to kill Miss Shuangshuang, he tried to harm the young master of the Chu family but failed. Then, he jumped out of the window and escaped. Even now, although the wanted poster had been posted everywhere, the criminal had not been arrested. If it weren't for the lady standing in the court, perhaps the case would have passed with the passage of time and be forgotten by people. However, her experience and the actions of the capital governor's office added many points of doubt to the case. How did Miss Shuang die? How did the criminal escape the heavy pursuit of the government without leaving a single trace? What role did the capital governor's office play in this case? The entire case suddenly became complicated and confusing. Everyone said that Do Yi was wronged. This lady's younger sister had died a dubious death. She went to the government to seek redress and was imprisoned for half a year. She had no place to seek redress for her grievances, so how could she not be wronged? Once the case broke out, it quickly attracted the attention of the people of the capital. It also made the Ministry of Justice pay great attention to it. The relevant witnesses of the Fine Sound Pavilion had already been brought to the Ministry of Justice and were heavily protected. The Ministry of Justice had also sent in a request to pull out all the files related to the case from the capital governor's office and reinvestigate the case. They wanted to prove the innocence of the deceased and give the people who were paying attention to the case an explanation. Under these circumstances, Do Yi's injustice continued to be performed in various brothels in the capital. Every day, countless benefit performances were held. In a certain brothel, Fang looked at Li Yi and said with some heartache, "Young master, this stage, this scene, this effect, so much ice, and only so little ticket money, and so many benefit performances. This time, we've suffered a great loss." Li Yi shook his head and looked at him. With sincere and heartfelt words, he said, "Don't always think about money. You also have to think about contributing to society." Chapter 899. People should look forward to the future, but they couldn't always focus on money. Fang had never been an educated man, so it was normal that he couldn't keep up with the times. Therefore, it was necessary to help him establish a correct outlook on life and values. For example, money could never be used up. When the time was right, he should give back to the society by helping the people perform for free, so that they could enjoy a 5D movie experience. Although he would lose money, he would be giving back to the society, which would help him realize his self-worth. Looking at his confused face, Chun Fan knew that he didn't understand. But this was not a big deal. The current old Fang's state of mind was much higher than before. He did good deeds without leaving his name, risked his life, and used his private money to support a single girl for 3 years without asking for anything in return. Even in this era where people's hearts were not so fickle, it was still very rare. This world doesn't give the poor a chance to live. Earth, you don't know what's good for you. Heaven, you don't know what's good for you. I don't want to shed even half a star of blood in the mortal world. If I have a stomach full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers rolling like a brocade, so that my body won't be exposed. From now on, the Chuzhou city will suffer from 3 years of drought. Inside the brothel, someone would stand up and shout from time to time. This was a typical example of someone who was too engrossed in the scene and placed himself in it. There was no need for the staff of the brothel to remind them at all. Someone beside them would press them down so that they wouldn't spoil everyone's interest. In another brothel, in a remote corner, the man handed a handkerchief to the middle-aged man next to him and sighed. "Lord 5, wipe your tears." The middle-aged man wiped his tears and heaved a sigh. "Well done. It's a good performance." The burly man nodded. If he didn't know that this was a play, he would have rushed up and punched that dog official to death with 3 punches when blood was splashed on the white rope and snow was flying in the 6th month of June. The middle-aged man stared at the stage and murmured, "Do Yi's grievances could be redressed, but I wonder how many more people's grievances are still buried in the darkness." The burly man shook his head and said, "The imperial court is already vigorously investigating the unjust and false cases. Those filthy and ugly fellows hiding in the dark will one day be dragged out and exposed to the sun." The middle-aged man nodded. "Yes, the sun is about to rise. How could it be? How could she sue the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming's face was filled with rage. The teacup in his hand fell to the ground and the tea splashed everywhere. He gasped for breath and loudly said, "Last time, we have already lost an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Now, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Luigi, is only following that person's orders. That woman is still in prison. How could such a thing happen? She caused trouble twice a few days ago and has already attracted the attention of some people. Without a reason, we can't keep her in prison forever. Tsing Shichen shook his head and said, I thought she would be more obedient after being locked up for so long. Who would have thought that as soon as she went out, the people following her were not paying attention and made her kneel in front of the Ministry of Justice? Cui Qingming returned to his seat and calmed down for a while. Then, he said in a deep voice, I will take care of this case. Otherwise, if it really gets investigated, not to mention Chu Ping, even you, the capital governor, will not be able to protect yourself. As soon as he finished speaking, a runner came in to report that the Ministry of Justice had arrived. Cui Qingming suddenly stood up from his seat, his face full of shock. How could it be so fast? The case of Miss Shuang of the Wonderful Sound Pavilion quickly had new developments. The case file of the capital governor's office that had accepted the case was full of loopholes and could not withstand scrutiny. The coroner who had examined the corpse also revealed the truth under the interrogation of the Ministry of Justice. That night, Miss Shuang was not killed by the criminal. Instead, she was tortured and humiliated to death. As for why the murderer was said to be the criminal who might not have appeared, they would have to ask the young master of the Chu family who was in the same room as Miss Shuang. The Cui family. A middle-aged man slammed the table and said angrily, how could there be such a big oversight? Does Tsing Shichen not have a brain? Doesn't he know what time it is? Then, a suspicious expression appeared on his face and he muttered, could it be Tsing Shichen? What good does this do for him? Cui Qingming shook his head and said, this case has attracted the attention of the court and the people. If it is found out, not only will he lose his position as the capital governor, but he will also lose his official position. The middle-aged man revealed a defeated expression. That Lu Yi is a ruthless character. It is said that there is no case that he cannot solve. This time, I'm afraid that the Chu family. One Chu family, one capital governor, we. Cui Qingming clenched his fists and asked through gritted teeth, what's the situation with the Chu family? The middle-aged man shook his head and said, the Ministry of Justice has not summoned Chu Ping for the time being, but it should be soon. In that place, no matter how tight-lipped one is, it is inevitable. What about that matter? The people no longer trust the Chu family. Even those great scholars do not dare to risk universal condemnation and speak casually. After all, this case has too many implications, and the situation is not optimistic. Cui Qingming thought for a long time and loosened his fists. He slowly said, the Chu family can't be saved, but the capital governor may not. The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then asked, will we also be dragged into this matter? Cui Qingming shook his head and said, Tsing Shichen is a smart man. He knows what to do. The Ministry of Justice investigated cases very quickly, and this case was extremely fast. They had no choice but to act quickly. The entire capital was watching the progress of the case, so they did not dare to delay. And this case was actually not complicated. There was no need to summon the grandson of the Grand Tutor. The several bailiffs of the capital government who knew about the case confessed everything not long after they were brought to the Ministry of Justice. They had indeed been pursuing a criminal that day, but the criminal had not been in the fine sound pavilion. They had accidentally stumbled upon young Master Chu's deed, only to discover to their shock that young Master Chu, who liked to play tricks, had accidentally strangled the young lady to death. What happened next was logical. The Chu family was a famous noble family in the capital. How could they tolerate such a stain on a member of their family? Naturally, they used the power of the family to cover up this matter. Thus, the cause of Lady Shuang's death became a crime committed by a fugitive. The young master of the Chu family, who was originally the murderer, suddenly became the victim. In order to cover up the truth, they quickly disposed of Lady Shuang's body. When Lady Shuang's sister went to the yamen to complain, they were afraid that the matter would be exposed, so they also arrested her and threw her into prison, adding insult to injury. This was simply insane. The injustice of Do Yi was just a play and could not be taken seriously, but Lady Shuang Shuang's grievance had really happened right beside them. They had heard it with their own ears, seen it with their own eyes, and had always been paying attention, and during the course of the trial, the bailiffs of the capital government revealed another secret that further solidified Chu Ping's crime. Not long ago, the disappearance of a girl that had caused an uproar actually also had the shadow of this young master of the Chu family. However, this matter was still concealed by the all-powerful Chu family. It was precisely because of this young master of the Chu family's perverted hobby that Lady Shuang Shuang had died a wrongful death. Lady Shuang Shuang must have been forced by that beast. No wonder it snowed on the night of the Lantern Festival. I originally thought that it was a strange phenomenon that happened once every few decades, but it turns out that the heavens were crying out for Lady Shuang Shuang's injustice. To think that I had always thought that the Chu family was the backbone of our Jing kingdom, that Grand Tutor Chu was a just and righteous person, but who would have thought, he still has the cheek to say that Lord Li is a sycophant. What has Lord Li done? He has made great contributions to the country and the people, but he is not the least bit proud of it. He has even repeatedly resigned from his position and refused to be rewarded. And what about him? He covered up for his descendant, causing such a huge injustice. How can he still be called a scholar? He even wants to frame Lord Li, the pillar of our Jing kingdom. If not for Prime Minister Qin and the other officials in the imperial court, I'm afraid, sycophant, this is a true sycophant. Old and undying, a great traitor to the country. In the court, Lu Qingtian slammed the gavel. Summon Chu Ping. A few bailiffs quickly walked out of the main gate and headed towards the Chu family. At first, there were only a few people following behind them. Soon, it became 10, then 100. After passing through an alley, the crowd behind them could no longer be seen. Chapter 900. The Chu family. Is this real or not, Grand Tutor? What should we do? The public's discontent is already boiling outside. They're coming here. Several elders paced back and forth in the hall with anxious expressions on their faces. Because of the Fine Sound Pavilion murder case, the Chu family had already been pushed to the heart of the struggle. As the case progressed, although most of the officials could still maintain their calm due to the prestige of the Grand Tutor, the common people of the capital had already lost trust in the Chu family and the elders. Yesterday, a rather famous scholar had been smashed in the head with a rock for merely saying, a sycophant harming the country, against County Marquis Li. His body was covered in rotten leaves and he was in an extremely sorry state. When he returned home, even the walls of the courtyard had been pushed down. The cause of all this was the Chu family. The Chu family had won the hearts of the people, but they had also lost the hearts of the people. The old man before them was just an ordinary old man. Grand Tutor Chu sat in a chair with a calm expression. It was impossible to tell what was on his face. He only stared blankly at the door as if in thought, but his eyes were empty. A servant of the Chu family ran in a panic and shouted, "The Ministry of Justice is here." Several constables walked in and slowly bowed to the old man in the chair. The one in the lead said, "Lord Grand Tutor, we suspect that your grandson is related to a serious case. Please come with us, young Master Chu." A middle-aged man rushed out from the side and shouted, "You think you can take Ping away just because you suspect him?" The constable took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over. He bowed and said, "Lord Chu, this is a warrant from the Ministry of Justice. Please take a look." The middle-aged man didn't even look at the warrant. He said coldly, "How can a member of the Chu family be taken away so easily by the Ministry of Justice? Without His Majesty's imperial edict, I'd like to see who dares to act recklessly in the Chu family." The constable's face showed some difficulty when he heard this. This was the Chu family. The Chu family was different from other family clans. With Grand Tutor Chu present, even the members of the Ministry of Justice could not act too brazenly. Of course, if the Chu family was reasonable, things would naturally go smoothly. If they insisted, they would probably have to seek His Majesty's decree. The constable looked at him and bowed, "If that's the case, we'll take our leave first." After the bailiffs left, the middle-aged man quickly walked up to Grand Tutor Chu and said loudly, "Father, are you going to watch as they take Ping away?" Qin Wen is right. The change of dynasties, the rise and fall of clans, these are all fated. How can there be a dynasty that can last for thousands of generations? How can there be a clan that can last forever? Grand Tutor Chu climbed up from the chair with some effort and murmured, "This old man is really old. When one gets old, it's easy to become confused. Father, I'll leave this matter to you." A few constables walked out of the Chu family's door, but they did not leave. This was because in front of them was a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. Where is Chu Ping? Why didn't that beast come out? Is it because the Chu family refuses to release him? Before the constables could answer, the crowd had already surged forward. When the Chu family's gatekeeper saw the black mass of people, he was frightened out of his wits and immediately closed the door. "Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over the murderer. Return Lady Shuangshuang's innocence. The people inside, listen up. You have been surrounded. Hurry up and hand over Chu Ping." Inside the Chu family, they heard the deafening shouts coming from outside. Even the ground beneath their feet was trembling. The faces of the elders were pale and their hearts were filled with extreme fear. It was not difficult to imagine how many people were outside from the sound and the situation. Once the Chu family's door was breached, the entire Chu family would be razed to the ground. Inside the Chu family's ancestral hall, an elder with white hair and beard faced the memorial tablet of the Chu family ancestor. He knelt on a praying mat as tears streamed down his face. "Unfilial descendant, you have brought shame to the Chu family ancestor." In the capital's county government, County Magistrate Liu, who was flipping through the case files, jumped in fright when he heard the voice that resounded throughout the capital. He was caught off guard and the pen in his hand fell to the ground. In the imperial palace, Emingzu put down the memorial and slowly walked out of the hall. She looked at the sky outside the palace walls. What's the situation outside? She seemed to be talking to herself. A female official walked over from the side and said respectfully, "Rest assured, Your Highness. I have already sent the imperial guards over. There won't be any trouble." In Hibiscus Garden, Emperor Jing, who was lying on the sickbed, slowly opened his eyes. Changde walked over and closed a window. "Grand Tutor Chu, what a pity." Changde narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "His death is not to be regretted for delaying His Majesty's illness." In the Li family, Li Yi covered the little fellow's ears to prevent him from being frightened by the sounds outside. When the first sound had come, it had startled the little fellow who had been taking an afternoon nap. He immediately bawled. It was not easy to coax him back to sleep, but the sounds outside still continued. His hand covered Li Duan's ears, but a hint of melancholy and pity appeared on his face. At this moment, whether inside or outside the capital, no matter what they were doing, almost everyone stopped what they were doing and raised their heads to look at the sky. In the sky, there were birds fleeing in all directions in fright. "Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over Chu Ping." The Chu family. The tightly shut doors slowly opened. Everyone was about to rush in when they saw the old man with the cane in front of them. They could not help but take a few steps back. The deafening sounds also gradually quieted down. "All of this is my fault." Grand Tutor Chu handed his cane to the servant next to him and slowly knelt in front of the crowd. In a hoarse voice, he said, "I have let down that lady, let down the ancestors of the Chu family, and let down the people of the world. Grandfather, get up. This is not your fault." After a sigh, a figure limped out from the crowd at the back. He walked in front of Grand Tutor Chu and carefully helped him up. He smiled and said, "It's not a good feeling to kneel. You're already so old. Kneeling like this will hurt your legs." Two servants of the Chu family hurriedly helped Grand Tutor Chu. Chu Ping did not even look at the crowd discussing outside the door. He slowly knelt in front of Grand Tutor Chu and heavily kowtowed. "I didn't mean to kill Lady Shuangshuang. However, it's no longer important to say these things now. You've brought me to so many places in the past, seen so many sceneries, and met so many people. I'm really grateful to you. Chu Ping kowtowed again. As he stood up, he said, everyone says the capital is good. In the past, when I was outside, I always thought about coming back. Only after coming back did I realize that the capital is actually the most boring place. Thank you. I'm sorry. He stood up and apologized to Grand Tutor Chu. He turned to face the vast crowd outside the Chu family and said loudly, everything that I, Chu Ping, have done is my own doing. It has nothing to do with the Chu family. Thud. 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 He knelt down on both knees and heavily kowtowed 3 times to the crowd. After the 3 kowtows, there was no more sound. He knelt there silently. The constable closest to him seemed to have thought of something. He took a step forward and gently pushed him. Chu Ping's body fell sideways. A dagger was stabbed straight into his chest. Fresh blood stained his clothes. Chapter 901. Seeing that young Master Chu was clearly no longer breathing, the constable took 2 steps back with a look of disbelief. There was no end to the exclamations in the crowd. No one expected Chu Ping to be dead. He had chosen to commit suicide in front of so many people. Was this suicide to escape punishment or death to atone for his crimes? Pinger. A middle-aged man rushed out from the Chu family crowd and picked up the corpse on the ground. His face was filled with grief as he wailed out loud. Grand Tutor Chu's body went limp. Fortunately, the Chu family servants behind him supported him, preventing him from falling. After he straightened his body, he waved away the Chu family servants who were supporting him and walked to the constable. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Are you taking his corpse away as well?" The constable immediately took 2 steps back and bowed. The evidence in this case was conclusive. If Chu Ping were still alive, he would naturally be brought to the Ministry of Justice for interrogation. But since he was dead, he had to leave some face for the Chu family. Chu Ping's corpse was brought in and the Chu family's main door slowly closed. The crowd outside stood in front of the Chu family for a long time, but ultimately did not rush in. Pooey. What bullsh *t. Someone spat viciously at the Chu family's main door before turning to leave. Someone said angrily, "Pooey. That old sycophant. Chu Ping is dead. Miss Shuangshuang should rest in peace." Another person sighed and walked a few steps before turning back to face the Chu family's main door. Pooey. On this day, nearly all the citizens of the capital came to the Chu family's front door for a tour. Although everyone had left, the Chu family's front door had become filthy. Even the signboard on the front door had been smashed down. A noble family of a generation had been reduced to such a state overnight. It also made countless officials and nobles in the capital realize how powerful the commoners they usually looked down on were. Chu Ping had committed suicide to atone for his crimes, but the Chu family's matter was not over yet. When Grand Tutor Chu was still a scholar in the Jing kingdom, he had cleansed the emperor's side and admonished the emperor. This was a matter of great moral integrity. But now that his moral integrity had been stripped away, all he had done was to slander the important officials of the court, form a clique for personal gain, harbor evil intentions, and even commit treason such as forcing the emperor to leave the Golden Palace. Moreover, he had harbored criminals and abused his power for personal gain. How could he escape the punishment of the law? Every generation of Grand Tutors had resigned due to old age. Grand Tutor Chu was the only one who had been stripped of his title by the imperial court. Chu Ping's father had also been stripped of his official position. The Chu family's former glory was gone, and no one ever mentioned the title of the scholarly bones of the Jing kingdom. Under the heavy punishment of the court, although the Chu manor was still preserved and the property was not confiscated, the people of Jingdo never saw the tightly closed front door of the Chu family open again. None of the great scholars who had once stood with Grand Tutor Chu said anything about this matter. In reality, it wasn't that they didn't say anything. In the beginning, there were some who spoke out, but before the court could react, they all disappeared because of the public opinion. Chu Ping died and the truth came to light. Lady Xuangshuang's injustice was cleared. The court felt wronged and set up a tomb for her in Jingdo for the people to worship. It also erected a warning monument for the government. The people would forever remember the name Xuangshuang. It was because of her death that the court paid attention to cases of injustice among the people and accelerated the reform of the law. It made the government truly a place to redress the grievances of the people and not a filthy place where those important people abused their power for personal gain. In this process, there were also some things that happened that exceeded everyone's expectations. After the case was concluded, the capital governor Tsing Shichen, who was deeply involved in this case, was restored to his position. Although he was also fined 3 years of his salary, compared to the impact of this case and the Chu family's ending, it was really nothing. The reason was that Lady Xuangshuang's older sister was very protective of this Sir Tseng in court. Although she had been arrested and thrown into the Yaman's prison, from beginning to end, she had not been mistreated or treated unfairly. The Yaman's bailiffs had taken good care of her in prison. Even when she was able to walk to the Ministry of Justice, it was the Yaman's people who escorted her. This clearly didn't make sense. If Tsing Shichen really wanted to seal her mouth, then he should have silenced her as soon as possible. Why did he give her so much preferential treatment? Even when she was being tortured, he played it down and went through the motions. In reality, when a few clever people heard this, they had already figured out the whole story. This Sir Tseng had arrested her and thrown her into prison. It looked like he was persecuting her, but he was actually protecting her. This was because the Chu family's background was very deep. Grand Tutor Chu alone could unite many of the great scholars, and even half of the officials in court to slander a pillar of the court who had made a great contribution to this country. What was a capital governor to them? He couldn't resist the Chu family, so he could only use this method to protect the girl. Otherwise, Lady Xuangshuang's case would probably never be overturned. A loyal official became a sycophant, a clean stream became a dirty stream, an upright official became a treacherous official, and then became an upright official again. Just like these days in the capital, the storm rose and then calmed, and then rose again. The injustice of Do-yi came to an end, and there was a new show in the brothel. The storm had calmed down a bit, and only a few ripples remained, enough to serve as a side dish for the people of the capital. You're talking about that sycophant. In a bun shop, a scholar in a scholarly robe had just spoken when a bun flew from the front and smashed into his face, followed by an angry voice. Who are you calling a sycophant? Say it again. The scholar picked up the bun that had fallen to the ground and looked at the shopkeeper of the bun shop. He said in a daze, I said that Grand Tutor Chu was a scholar, loved and respected by the people, and trusted by the officials. Who would have thought that he would do such a thing to ruin his reputation? It's really, the shopkeeper of the bun shop looked surprised. Ah, you mean that old sycophant? Who else could it be? The owner of the bun shop waved his hand and said awkwardly, Hi, I'm really sorry. I got addicted to smashing you scholars a while ago. It's fine. That bun is on me, it's free. The Chu family has now completely declined. No one in the capital is willing to have anything to do with them. After the reform of the law, the pressure on the government has increased a lot. Fortunately, after that period of busyness, the pressure has lessened a lot. Most cases are actually not that complicated, and it's not every day that there's a case of injustice. Without Grand Tutor Chu leading the way, that matter can be considered to have completely calmed down. Mingzu looked at Li Yi and sighed. It's finally over. After a long time without receiving a response, she extended her hand and waved it in front of Li Yi's eyes. Li Yi came back to his senses and asked, what did you just say? Mingzu looked at him and finally waved her hand. Nothing. How is this the end? Li Yi shook his head. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and said, This is just the beginning. He jumped down from the carriage and walked towards a building in front of him. It was an ancestral hall. In the ancestral hall, there was a stone tablet. The people of the capital lined up like flowing water. After placing an incense stick in front of the stone tablet, they left through the other side. Li Yi lined up and placed an incense stick in front of the stone tablet. He then stood to the side for a while before walking out. Mingzu was still standing next to the carriage, looking at another carriage. A green-clothed manservant walked over from that side. He bowed and said respectfully, "My master invites you over." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Who is your master?" "You'll know when you get there, my lord." Li Yi looked at the carriage that was parked in the corner and walked towards it. As he walked to the side of the carriage, the curtain was lifted by a withered hand, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. The old man seemed to have aged another 10 years since the last time he had seen him. Li Yi cupped his hands and said, "Grand Tutor, long time no see." Behind the curtain, the old man looked at him emotionlessly and said in a hoarse voice, "You once asked me if it was worth it. For my own selfishness, I buried the entire Chu clan. It was indeed not worth it." He shook his head, his eyes suddenly becoming sharp. "But the eldest imperial son returning to the capital to inherit the throne is natural. Have you ever thought about what you are doing? What you are doing is worth it. Just what do you want?" He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Prince Jin is young and you have no contact with the other princes. Tell me, just what do you want?" Li Yi looked at him and slowly asked, "Grand Tutor, do you really want to know?" Grand Tutor Chu said nothing and only stared fixedly at him. "Since Grand Tutor wants to know." Li Yi shook his head and walked into the carriage. Grand Tutor Chu leaned forward. He moved his head closer and whispered, "I won't tell you." Chapter 902. As the carriage drove past, there was a violent cough coming from inside. Mingzu turned back to look at Li Yi. "What did you say to Grand Tutor?" Li Yi shook his head. "Nothing." Mingzu looked at the carriage in front again. The coughing gradually faded away. She continued to look at him with a look that said, "Do you believe me?" "I swear on the honor of a sycophant." Li Yi raised 4 fingers. "I really didn't say anything to him." The main reason for the Chu family's demise was not the Cui family. Under normal circumstances, the 2 crimes that Chu Ping had committed, according to the previous laws of the Jing kingdom, were nothing more than a high-class person killing a low-class person and having to pay some silver taels. Even Chu Ping himself might not be severely punished. The real reason was Grand Tutor Chu. From his inaction in the beginning, or his shielding, to his worsening later, Grand Tutor Chu could not turn back, nor could the Chu family. All of this was caused by Grand Tutor Chu, who cherished his reputation and was extremely famous. The Chu family rose because of its reputation, and was also dragged down by it. It was a century-old family that had fallen to such a state. He had once asked Grand Tutor Chu whether it was worth it or not. Grand Tutor Chu did not answer, but gave the answer with his actions. But no matter what, this old man was once prominent and was still watched by countless people. If he was told that the king of Shu was not his majesty's biological son, and that he wanted Mingzu to be the empress, Grand Tutor Chu might have a heart attack or a brain hemorrhage. If he was not careful, he would not be able to clear his name. The 2 did not get on the carriage again, but walked back. When they were about to walk past the ancestral hall, 2 figures walked toward them. The middle-aged man walking in front raised his head and was slightly stunned. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Lord Li." Mingzu turned back to look at Li Yi, the doubt in her eyes obvious. "Qin He, the 5th son of Prime Minister Qin." Li Yi explained to her, then looked at 5th Master Qin and pointed at his hair, his eyes full of doubt. "Oh, about that." 5th Master Qin smiled and said, "I'm old, so I'm not like you young people." Li Yi nodded and then slightly cupped his hands. "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin, for dealing with the matters in the court recently. Please thank him on my behalf. I will personally visit him another day to thank him. My father is only doing what he thinks is right." "We can't say anything." 5th Master Qin shook his head and said, "However, I will convey Lord Li's message." Li Yi looked at the ancestral hall behind him and asked, "Did you also come to pay your respects to Lady Xuangshuang?" 5th Master Qin nodded and said, "Although Lady Xuangshuang is no longer here, her death is meaningful. There are so many people who remember her, and there are countless people who are deeply grateful to her. Her death alone accomplished something that the entire court could not do. It is worthy of worship. On the way back, Mingzu looked at him and asked, "Is he Qin He, the Qin He that Uncle Wang mentioned?" "What, he doesn't look like him." She shook her head and said, "I just feel that a person who is worthy of Uncle Wang's evaluation shouldn't be like this. Don't be fooled by this fifth master of the Qin clan's sloppy appearance." Li Yi smiled and said, "He's a truly powerful person." In the ancestral hall, after the two of them burned incense in front of the stone tablet, they entered the ancestral hall. As soon as they entered, they saw a statue of a woman the size of a normal person. Below the statue was a spacious platform. After people burned incense outside, they would place the things they brought to pay their respects on this platform. The burly man asked mysteriously, "Fifth Master, the person beside Lord Li just now was the princess?" "What, do I not look like her?" Fifth Master Qin casually asked as he placed a plate of pastries in the box on the platform. "To be honest, she doesn't look like her." The burly man nodded. Just as he was wondering why he hadn't noticed before, he suddenly heard a cracking sound. He turned his head to look at Fifth Master beside him and said in surprise, "Fifth Master, where did you get the apple in your hand?" Fifth Master Qin casually pointed to the fruit plate on the platform that was clearly missing an apple. "There, it tastes pretty good. Do you want it?" "This." The burly man looked at him in disbelief. "This was given to Lady Shuangshuang by someone else." "Fifth Master, you, Shuangshuang." Fifth Master Qin shook his head and said, "She doesn't like eating apples. It's a waste to keep it." Crack. Another sound. "What are you doing over there?" At this moment, there were still many people in the ancestral hall. When someone raised his head and saw the scene, he immediately stood up in anger. "You even dare to eat something given to Lady Shuangshuang? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog?" "What, who did it?" "Take them to the officials." The burly man grabbed an apple and grabbed Fifth Master Qin's arm. He hurriedly said, "What are you waiting for? Run." A moment later, in an alley in Jingdo, Fifth Master Qin panted heavily. He patted a footprint on his body and asked, "What, how is this apple?" The burly man took a bite and nodded. "It's crispy and sweet. Why doesn't Lady Shuangshuang like it?" Fifth Master Qin leaned against the wall and sighed. "Yes, I also don't understand why she doesn't like it." He was silent for a moment. After waiting for the burly man to finish eating the apple, he said, "Wu Er, how long have you been following me?" The burly man froze for a moment. In the next moment, he threw away the apple and clapped his hands. Solemnly, he said, "Fifth Master, tell me, what do you want me to do this time?" "Go follow the little Duke and see what he's been doing these days. I'm the best at following people." The burly man patted his chest. "With me doing things, Fifth Master can rest assured. The trail is broken." Li Yi sighed and said, "How could it be broken?" Yi shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice and the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find anything. The person behind this case must have great power in Jingdo." Li Yi rubbed the space between his brows and suddenly felt a headache coming on. He tilted his head to look at the princess and said helplessly, "Now there's only the Chui family left. Why don't we choose another path?" Mingzu looked at him and asked in confusion, "What path?" "I know a path that leads directly to the central lake of the Academy of Mathematics. If we go at night, we'll definitely not be discovered. Why don't we take advantage of the darkness and wind, sink the Chui family into the lake? You also think this is a good idea, right? It's simple, convenient, and saves time. Do you want me to help you kidnap Consort Chui out of the palace?" "If you can help, that would be great." Li Yi met her eyes. Yi quickly looked out the window. A moment later, Li Yi shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's dark and I can't see the road clearly. Let's think about it at length. If the Chui family could be taken down so easily, father wouldn't have waited until now." Mingzu shook her head and said, 20 years ago, their power had already seeped into every corner of the imperial court. They also have a good reputation among the people. Although they are not as powerful as before, they still have a foundation that cannot be underestimated. Li Yi sighed and said, that's why I said it's more convenient to choose another path. Fong strode in from outside and handed him an envelope. He said, young master, there's news from Wu Er. Li Yi opened the envelope and looked at it. He handed it to Lu Yi and said with a smile, isn't it connected now? Chapter 903. Li Yi handed the letter to Lu Yishui and said, keep an eye on Qin Yu. You should be able to find something. Lu Yishui took the letter and looked at it. He nodded and said, I understand. Mingzu seemed to understand what he wanted to do. When she walked into the courtyard, she turned around and asked, are you going to deal with the Chui family the same way you dealt with the Chu family? The Chui family has many henchmen. They won't do many things themselves. As long as the matter of the king of Shu is not exposed, unless the Chui family is plotting a rebellion, it won't have much impact on the general situation. Li Yi shook his head and said, let's take one step at a time. A dam of 1,000 miles will collapse because of an ant's nest. If we add up all the things one by one, it might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back. Mingzhu's tone was firm. We can't let father know about that matter no matter what. Of course I know that. Otherwise, the Chui family will die countless times for this crime. Li Yi had thought about this contradiction many times. It was obvious that it was easy to destroy the Chui family through that matter, but it was easier to destroy the old emperor. They couldn't take this risk. The two reached a tacit understanding on this matter. There was nothing to discuss. Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu on the other side of the courtyard. She seemed to have just finished practicing. He thought for a moment and waved his hand. Rui, come here for a moment. Mississippi Lu put down autumn water and walked over. She cast an inquiring look at him. Li Yi looked at the two standing together. After a moment, he looked at Mississippi Lu and said in surprise, I find that you have been growing recently. I remember that you were shorter than the princess at the beginning. Now you are the same height. Mississippi Lu looked at him. When have I ever been shorter than her? You didn't? Li Yi shook his head and said, then I must have remembered wrongly again. I don't know what happened to my memory recently. Li Yi walked the princess out the door and saw sister-in-law Feng walking over from afar. When he saw the person beside her, he was instantly stunned. He closed his eyes in disbelief, and when he opened them again, sister-in-law Feng was already talking to the woman beside her with a smile. Li Yi looked back at Mississippi Lu and asked, who's the girl next to Mrs. Feng? I've never seen her before. Mississippi Lu looked in that direction and said, yesterday, when Aunt Feng went to the temple to offer incense, she met Miss Xiao on the road. Miss Xiao came to the capital to seek shelter with her relatives, but she couldn't find her and was robbed of her traveling expenses. Aunt Feng pitied her and temporarily took her in. Miss Xiao. Li Yi nodded and sighed. Sister-in-law Feng is really kind. Sister-in-law Feng actually treats people very well, and Uncle Feng is also not bad. It's just that he looks a little fierce usually. Li Yi nodded. Speaking of which, you two are quite similar, but you don't know how to use a broom when you fight, which is much better than her. Mississippi Lu's temper had really improved recently, and Li Yi couldn't help but feel that his youth was gone forever. She could even cook a bowl of noodles that tasted pretty good by herself. The unruly, willful, unreasonable, and unworldly Mississippi Lu seemed to be gone forever. Of course, the person who made him feel that time could change a person the most was Feng. He had quietly sent sister-in-law Feng's biggest enemy to her side, and the two of them could get along with each other like sisters. There was harmony inside and outside the house. Li Yi didn't think he had the ability to do so. Some things have to be faced. I don't have the ability of the son-in-law, so of course I have to find another way. When Feng said this, his face was shrouded in a sacred glow. For him, this was indeed a big deal. To be able to let sister-in-law Feng and Little Red get along like sisters, this was simply a fantasy, unbelievable, and something that he didn't even dare to think about in the past. In contrast, his own affairs were more difficult to deal with. Although drunk Mo's tone had relaxed these days, it seemed that she was still not completely mentally prepared. And this was just drunk mo. The road was long, and the revolution had not yet succeeded. Comrades still needed to work hard. In the old house of the Xing family, drunk mo helped them make tea. When they walked back to the room, Xing Shichen said, "After this incident, the Chui family probably doesn't trust me much anymore." This did not come as a surprise to Li Yi. That case involved a lot of people, and it was the focus of the entire capital. Removing him from it would undoubtedly be a hell of a challenge. One careless move and it would cause a wave of public opinion. When the Chui family knew that they couldn't protect the Chu family, they had actually used the power of the court to protect him, the capital governor. However, they encountered great obstacles, and in the end, they had no choice but to stop. In this way, the subsequent reversal of public opinion seemed extremely suspicious. With the protection of that girl, if the Chui family still didn't suspect them, they would have been eaten up in the capital. Although the king of Shu is still in Shuzhou, as long as His Majesty doesn't appoint a crown prince, he is still the most promising. Xing Shichen looked at him and said slowly, "Once something happens to His Majesty, the king of Shu will inherit the throne. This is almost without a doubt. Until now, are you still not willing to tell me which side you are on? Although the Chui family probably won't do anything to you, you still have to be careful." Li Yi didn't answer. He just warned him and turned to go inside. A thoughtful look appeared on Xing Shichen's face. After a moment, he dipped his finger in the tea and wrote 2 words on the table. Soon, he crossed out the 2 words, Prince Jean, on the stone table. In the situation where His Majesty still had adult princes, the possibility of a child inheriting the throne was too small. For the sake of the overall situation, His Majesty would not make such a choice. On this point, Li Yi definitely knew better than he did. As for the other princes, whether it was status or talent, they were far inferior. More importantly, those princes were far away in their fiefdoms, and Li Yi had no contact with them. Apart from Prince Jean, among the princes, there was not a single one who had both a high status and a close relationship with him. However, he had a close relationship with the princesses. She had offended the king of Shu for Princess Yongning, causing the Chui family to see him as a thorn in their side. Princess Shaning was also very close to him, and there was no barrier when they got along. As for the eldest princess, needless to say, it was said that they were close friends when they were in Qing and prefecture. In the past few years in the capital, the eldest princess established the Women's College and the Women's Union. She was deeply loved by the women in the capital, and founded the academy, which won the hearts of the scholars in the world. Ever since she took over the government, all the civil and military officials in the court would praise the eldest princess when they mentioned her. There were countless officials in the court who were as loyal to her as they were to His Majesty. Who would still dare to treat her as a woman? Not to mention, great scholar Chu's actions backfired and he lost the hearts of the people. Her Highness reformed the law, which was also applauded by the people. Behind all these things, there was actually his shadow. It was strange that he didn't know what he was thinking. Instead of supporting a prince, he spared no effort to do these things for the eldest princess. What was he thinking? Xing Shichen picked up the teacup and put it down again, the expression on his face frozen. Chapter 904. In the room, Madame Chen was teaching drunken ink embroidery. For the daughters of the noble families in the capital city, embroidery was a necessary skill. Most of them would embroider their wedding dresses with their own hands before they got married. Seeing Li Yi come in, she quickly hid the wedding dress. Li Yi didn't know what she was thinking. She actually looked at the wedding dress more secretively than the belly band. He had even seen her wearing the belly band several times, but she didn't even show him a wedding dress that wasn't embroidered. Madame Chen put their hands together and said, "You two, it's time to pick a day and set the date early. You can't keep dragging it on like this. It's still early." Drunken Ink lowered her head and whispered. Li Yi glanced at her and said, "What do you mean it's still early?" "It's not early." Watching her break free from his hand and run out quickly, Li Yi shook his head helplessly. Although she usually looked very bold, after the two of them got closer, she became shy. Third Miss Chen looked at her running out with a smile. After a long time, she turned her head and sighed, saying, "You are still young and don't know the dangers of the court. A family can live in peace and harmony. Even if it's a little dull, it's much better than facing those deceitful battles every day." Li Yi lowered his head but didn't speak. No one liked to live in deceit and conspiracy all day long. Compared with this, wasn't it more interesting to play with the children, Rui, and the proud Lolita at home? If you want stability, you must first endure turbulence. She looked outside the door. The two women were talking about something. She turned back and said, "I think Ruoqing is also thinking about you. Although drunken ink is here, you can't always ignore her. I can see that her heart is actually more bitter than anyone else. You can't let her down." "I know." Li Yi looked outside the door and nodded. "I won't." She looked at Li Yi, and a rare hint of resentment appeared on her face. "Your father was so devoted back then. In order to elope with your mother, he didn't even want the inheritance of his family. Why is it that when it comes to you, you just have to provoke so many debts of love?" An awkward expression appeared on Li Yi's face. Unable to refute, he could only remain silent. She patted the back of Li Yi's hand and said, "All right, it's your good fortune to be able to gain the favor of so many wonderful people. I only hope that in the future, you won't hurt anyone's heart." After saying that, he stood up and said with a smile, "When it comes to you, I can't help but talk too much. Accompany them well, I'm going back." Li Yi stood up at the same time and saw her out. He watched as Chen Chong walked out of the tea house across the street. A servant girl of the Chen estate helped her into the carriage. Just as Chen Chong was about to get into the other carriage, Li Yi suddenly asked, "Is official Chen this free every day?" Chen Chong's hand, which had already lifted the curtain, lowered again. He countered with a question, "Could it be that official Li plans to go to the princess and report me?" "I'm not the kind of person who would report on someone." Li Yi shook his head. "I just want to advise official Chen that you are an official of the imperial court. Every month, there will be a few days where you have to pretend to be working hard. Of course, other than this, I also have a small matter to remind official Chen." He slightly lowered his voice and said, "Stay as far away from the Chui clan as possible." A scornful expression appeared on Chen Chong's face. Just as he was about to speak, he heard the second half of Chen Chongqing's words and froze. He asked, "What do you mean?" "Official Chen will understand," Li Yi looked at him and said once more. Then he turned and walked back into the courtyard. Chen Chong was left standing there, his expression solemn. Thousands of thoughts had already flashed through his mind, and in the end, they all boiled down to a certain message. The Chui clan was probably going to change. When Li Yi walked back, Zui Mo walked out of the room and asked, "Has Madame Chen left?" "She's gone back." Li Yi walked over and put his arm around her slender waist. "She asked me to spend more time with you too." Who asked you to spend more time?" She looked frantically at Xing Shichen, who was sitting in the courtyard drinking tea, and hurriedly pushed him away. Then, she seemed to realize something. Looking at him, she asked uncertainly, "You too?" Li Yi turned and walked quickly in Xing Shichen's direction. "Lord Seng, what do you think about that matter just now?" "I think that the king of Shu has no talent or virtue, and is indeed not suitable for the throne. Otherwise, the country that His Majesty and the courtiers have painstakingly stabilized would probably be destroyed in his hands." Xing Shichen thought for a moment and said, "Among the many princes, His Highness King Jin is an outstanding person, and his status is equally noble. However, King Jin is too young, and it is difficult for him to ascend to the throne. At present, apart from His Majesty, the only one who can govern the country well is the eldest princess. However, the eldest princess has already set a precedent by assisting the government." "It is really?" Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is this what we were talking about just now?" What Xing Shichen said was very reasonable. In fact, the more they talked about it, the more he felt how difficult it was to let Mingzu wear that uniform and experience the temptation of the dragon robe. Their original purpose was just to prevent this great country from falling into the hands of the king of Shu. Now, the king of Shu had been eliminated in advance. She did not want the old emperor to know about this, but she would never agree to let the Li family's country fall into the hands of others. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Her Highness nodded. That's right. No matter what, this country cannot fall into the hands of the King of Shu. This pavilion had become a place where the two of them talked in secret more and more frequently. Because there was lake water everywhere and the sound of waves was mixed in, unless someone had clairvoyance and hearing, they would not be able to hear what they were talking about. He looked around. There seemed to be a flash of light in the trees by the shore of the lake and disappeared in an instant. Mingzu suddenly said, King Ning has returned to Qing'an Prefecture. Li Yi looked back at her and asked, it is already June. They should have returned long ago. What is so strange about this? It is because King Ning has returned that it is strange. Mingzu shook her head and said, this time, only King Ning has returned and taken the military seal. It is enough to mobilize 2,000 soldiers. What can 2,000 soldiers do? It is enough to confiscate the ancestral home of the Chui family in Qing'an Prefecture. As for rebellion, I'm afraid it is far from enough. Li Mingzhu looked at the surface of the lake for a long time before turning around. A hint of confusion appeared on her face. I suspect that Fu Wang and Ning Wangshu are hiding something from us, and from the court officials. I can't see it. In the low trees by the lake, Li Xian looked at the two people in the pavilion with their backs facing him and murmured helplessly. With great difficulty, he saw Mingzu turn around. He immediately became alert and tightened his grip on the binoculars in his hands. I am pregnant with Father, the Emperor, from the court officials. He frowned and murmured, you spoke so fast, how can I hear you clearly? A look of doubt surfaced on his face. What exactly was Mingzhu thinking? She had hidden it from Uncle Huang and the court officials. She seemed to be at a loss. Clatter. As if realizing something, he sucked in a cold breath. Shock appeared on his face. The binoculars in his hands suddenly fell to the ground and he jumped out of the bushes. Li Yi and Mingzu raised their heads and saw Li Xian, who was wearing a garland made of tree branches and decorated with a few small flowers. Surprise appeared on their faces at the same time. Chapter 905. Today, Li Xian was dressed in dark clothes, and the wreath of branches on his head was particularly eye-catching. If he smeared some camouflage paint on his face, he would look even more like the real deal. I saw what you said just now. He ran all the way here, panting heavily, and the shock on his face had not faded. Li Yi did not know why he was dressed like this, and asked in surprise, what did you see? Li Xian pointed at the binoculars hanging around his neck, and Li Yi was even more confused. Li Xian looked at the two of them, and his eyes were filled with extreme surprise. I don't need to listen to what you're saying. I only need to look at your lips to know what you're saying. Li Yi looked at him, and his expression was slightly shocked. You've learned to read lips? Without waiting for Li Xian to nod, he remembered that during this period of time, whenever the two of them spoke, he would always stare at his own lips. Could it be that he was really learning to read lips? Then he looked at the binoculars hanging around his neck. Could it be that the purpose of him learning to read lips was to peep and eavesdrop? This guy, what was going on in his mind? Li Yi's lips moved, and he asked in disbelief, did you see what I said just now? It's useless even if you scold me. Li Xian's gaze swept back and forth between the two of them, and he said, I've already seen what you've said just now. Li Yi and Mingzu looked at each other, and they both felt a headache coming on. The reason why the two of them chose this place was to avoid Li Xian. After all, with his character of wanting to see the world in chaos, if he knew about this matter, he might cause some trouble. But no matter how careful they were, they never expected that he would purposely learn to read lips, and the binoculars hanging around his neck were probably high-quality products from the Academy of Science. How could there be such a bored person in the world? This is really too disgraceful. A worried expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at Mingzu, and said with a pained expression, you are the princess, you too, how could you do such a thing? looking at the extremely agitated Li Xian. Li Yi looked back at Emingzu and said, "Why don't we sink into the lake? Looks like we can't hide it anymore." Li Yi sighed, and looked at Emingzu again, and asked, "You or me?" Li Mingzhu waved her hand and sat on a stone chair to the side. She looked at the calm lake and said, "Speak." Li Yi nodded. He looked at Li Xian and asked again, "What did you hear just now?" "You don't have to test me." Li Xian glanced at the two of them and said, "If the imperial uncle, the court officials, and the entire world were to find out about this disgraceful and heinous act, the two of you would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom." Li Yi shook his head. It seemed that he was really bored to a certain extent, and indeed learned to read lips. At this point, there was no need to test him anymore. You know, although the king of Shu has been chased to Shu province, and his reputation has been ruined, he is still the eldest son of the emperor. If something happens to his majesty, he will most likely make a comeback, and even ascend the throne. Li Yi looked at him, and said, "The princes of his majesty have no talent or virtue. If the world falls into their hands, it will end in defeat sooner or later. We have come step by step to where we are today, and we can't let the court go back to its original path. Moreover, with the power in Mingzhu's hands, she will not have a good ending for any of the princes who succeed the throne." Hearing this, Li Xian's face darkened. How could he not understand this logic? Only Uncle Emperor was broad-minded enough to allow the eldest princess to rule the country, and hand over all the affairs of the country to her. Until now, most of the court officials had acquiesced to the eldest princess's existence. But if the new emperor succeeded the throne, he would definitely not allow these powers to be held in the hands of a princess. Even the Academy of Sciences would be out of his control. The precondition for their peace was that Uncle Huang was still in control of the country. Once he was gone, many people's fates would be turned upside down. However, although this was the truth, it had nothing to do with what they said. That was not the point. One was an unmarried princess, and the other was an important official with a family. The two of them were together secretly, and no one would find out, and everything would be fine. But now that Emingzu was pregnant, they could not hide it for long. Once this matter was made public, it would become the biggest scandal in the royal family, and the two of them would be condemned by everyone. Even if they could keep their lives, they would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom. Why are you so careless?" Li Xian looked at them exasperatedly, and sighed, and said, "Go to a place where no one knows you, and don't come back. Let me finish first." Li Yi looked at him calmly, and Li Xian looked at him, lowered his head, and said, "Go ahead. Actually, Prince Jean is the most suitable person to inherit His Majesty's position." Li Yi looked in the direction of the arithmetic school, and said slowly, "But he is too young, and can't take up the heavy responsibility, so, why are you saying this to me at this time?" "Shut up, let me finish." After Li Xian completely shut up, Li Yi said again, "So, we have to push Emingzu to that position." Li Xian was stunned, and looked at him in surprise, and asked, "Push to what position?" "His Majesty's position." Li Xian looked at him, and then looked at Emingzu, and rubbed his head, and waved his hand. "Wait a minute, I'm a little confused now, let me sort it out first." After a long time, he raised his head again, and asked, "Isn't Emingzu pregnant?" Her Royal Highness stood up abruptly, and her pretty face blushed. She looked at him and said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Li Xian said in a daze, "I clearly saw that you said you were pregnant. How long have you been learning to read lips?" Li Yi thought for a moment, and suddenly asked. "Less than a month," Li Xian said after thinking for a moment. Li Yi looked straight at him, and asked, "You rushed over because you thought Emingzu was pregnant?" Li Xian nodded, and said confidently, "What else could it be?" "What you said just now, was it because of this?" Li Yi rubbed his forehead, and asked again. Li Xian was surprised, and said, "Could it be that Emingzu is not pregnant, and I'm seeing things?" After saying that, he suddenly had a look of realization, and looked straight at Li Yi. Wait, what did you say just now? What position should we push Emingzu to?" Li Yi sighed, and turned to look at Emingzu. "Why don't we just sink?" Chapter 906. Such an important matter. Li Xian's face was gloomy as he paced back and forth in the pavilion. Occasionally, he pointed at the two of them. Li Yi and Mingzu were both silent. Influenced by their traditional education and beliefs, this was the first time they had heard of this matter. It was indeed difficult for them to accept. How dare you not tell me? Li Xian slammed his palm on the stone table and asked angrily, such an important matter, how dare you hide it from me? Are you not treating me as one of your own? The anger on his face only lasted for a moment before disappearing in the next moment. He clapped his hands and said with a face full of surprise, why didn't I think of this idea before? To him, it would be best if he could maintain the current status quo. However, no matter who inherited the throne, with his identity and position, he would not have a good life in the capital. However, who was Mingzu? She had grown up with him and the three heroes of the capital had gone through thick and thin together. It was as if they were wearing the same pants. Although it was the two of them who were wearing the same pants now, based on the current situation, if Mingzu could really sit on the throne, it would definitely be the best outcome. However, although she was also the child of the emperor, she was a woman. Would it be difficult for a woman to become the emperor? Thinking about it carefully, the dragon robe did not look good on her either. This matter is not certain yet. Let's not talk about it for now. Li Yi pressed on his shoulder to calm him down. He said, you cannot tell anyone about what happened today, including His Majesty, your father, mother, the crown princess, and your brother Shen. Don't worry, I know the severity of this matter. Other than the three of us, I will not let a fourth person know. Li Xian nodded solemnly, then said, based on what you said, the biggest obstacle in front of us now is the Cui family. The Cui family has done such a rebellious thing, and they are still jumping around in the court all day long. It is really annoying to see. Should we go all out? He turned his head to look. I think this lake in the academy is not bad. Although he didn't know from whom did Li Xian learn this unreliable idea of sinking into the lake, he was right about one thing. As long as the Cui family didn't fall, they wouldn't have peaceful days. This time, it was fine if they didn't make a move, but if they made a move, the Cui family wouldn't be able to make a comeback, once and for all. As for the secret between the two of them being known by him, it did not affect them much. Li Xian, who was born with a short brain, was muddle-headed on many things, but he had never messed up on a major matter. At least he knew that in the future, he wouldn't be like before, always causing trouble at the drop of a hat. He came out to wander around after learning half of lip reading and ended up making such a big mistake. However, this incident also reminded him that there were even perverts in this world who specialized in lip reading and hid in the dark with binoculars to peep at him. In the future, no matter what he did, it was better to be extra careful. After stepping into the house, all the messy thoughts in his mind disappeared. Wife, children, sister-in-law, and the little servant girl who was about to grow up and was gradually getting rid of the silly adorable. This was another small world, blocking all the things that were incompatible with the word home outside. Mississippi Lu was holding a piece of paper in her hand and saying something to Rui. It was probably because she encountered some words that she didn't know. Rui was the kind of person who could calm down no matter what she did. When the two sisters were young, they also did literacy and other things, but it was probably useless for Mississippi Lu. Li Yi picked up a few pieces of paper that were messily placed on the table and looked at them. Most of them were about the Lu League. The Lu League had already formed a stable system. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an organization. The elite disciples were all skilled in martial arts. They were famous martial arts masters on the master ranking list and the chivalry ranking list. As for other places, it was more of a relationship similar to a contract. There were many masters in the league and they had strong financial support. They took what they needed from the people in the martial arts world and cooperated with tacit understanding. It could be said that they had completely changed the current situation of the martial arts world. As the leader of the Lu League, Mississippi Lu's growth was amazing. Of course, this did not refer to a specific part of her body. Other than physical growth, there was also psychological growth. Thinking back to 3 years ago, the girl in white who was riding on a horse and holding a sword, and now the girl who frowned and bit her thumb, staring at the piece of paper in front of her seriously, were like two different people. There was another stack of papers on the table. Li Yi also flipped through them. They were all information about the Wu Kingdom. As the only country in the vicinity that had fallen into internal strife, although the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom was strong, there were too many rebels and traitors in the country. It could not be suppressed in a short time. The surrounding countries might have some other ideas besides watching them make a fool of themselves. Seeing him walk in, Ru Yi seemed to have seen her savior. She hurriedly said, "Aya, my husband is back. Quickly help Rui take a look at what's written on this. I've been having a headache these past few days." The reason why Rui had a headache was that Mississippi Lu would ask her whenever she encountered something that she did not understand. In fact, Rui only recognized a few more words than her. When it came to the meaning of poems and articles, she would also have a headache. As for why Mississippi Lu did not ask him directly, Li Yi also felt strange. After Rui spoke, Mississippi Lu reluctantly handed the paper to him. Li Yi glanced at it and knew the reason why Mississippi Lu had a headache. This was something similar to the Imperial Court spy report. The words and sentences were not like ordinary letters. It was very official and difficult to understand. It was normal for people like Mississippi Lu, who were still in the stage of literacy, to not understand it. Li Yi looked at it and said, "It says that Princess Duanrong of the Wu Kingdom joined forces with a traitor and conquered 2 provinces of the Wu Kingdom in a row. She was captured alive by the imperial court and will be executed in a few days." What? Mississippi Lu's expression changed dramatically. "Of course it's a lie." Li Yi put the paper aside and said, "It's true that they conquered 2 provinces. They have a lot of soldiers under their command. They used to be in the military camp and have good strength. Now they are in a stalemate with the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom. Nothing will happen in a short time." Mississippi Lu took a deep breath, and her chest rose and fell a few times. She looked at him and said, "Come here, I'll show you something good." Did she think he was stupid? If he went with her now, nothing good would come out of it. Li Yi took Li Duan from Rui's arms. After such a long time of guidance, the 8-month-old little guy could make clearer father and mother. Of course, he still called Xiaonyang more often. Rui sat down beside him and said softly, "I went to see Sister Zumo today." Li Yi turned to look at her. I've already talked to Sister Zumo. She said that after a few days, she will move in with us." Li Yi looked at her in surprise. She agreed. Rui looked at him in confusion and asked, "Why not?" Li Yi suddenly doubted the meaning of life. He nagged her about this matter every day. All his efforts were not as good as a word from Rui. This was a bit too hurtful. When he walked out of the door gloomily, he met a little maid who came in. She looked up at him and said, "Young master, second miss asked you to go to her room. She has a question to ask you." What question could he not ask just now? Why did he have to go to her room? Walking to Mississippi Lu's room on the other side, the door was open. Li Yi knocked on the door and stepped in. Mississippi Lu sat at the table, looked up, and said, "Close the door." Li Yi closed the door, then turned his head and asked in confusion, "What's the problem? Why close the door?" Chapter 907. At the door of Mississippi Lu's room, Xiaohuan leaned against a pillar while munching on melon seeds. She carefully listened to the movements inside the room. Inside the room, Li Yi was thrown onto the bed. He covered his buttocks and glared at Mississippi Lu angrily. He said he had a question for her. He was just curious why she closed the door. It turned out that she was going to beat him up. What a heartless fellow. To think that he was so kind and considerate of her. Li Yi looked at her warily and threatened, "If you continue to act like this, I won't accompany you to the Wu Kingdom." What did you say? Mississippi Lu was stunned. Her hand that was about to fall stopped in the air. She asked, "What did you say just now?" Say it again. I was thinking of accompanying you to the Wu Kingdom after I'm done with my work. Now, I need to think about it. his original intention was not to go to the Wu Kingdom. Counting the days, Lin Wanru should have reached the Qi Kingdom by now. The business there was about to start. In this year, the situation in the fringe had also changed greatly. Every once in a while, there would be news. He had to go and take a look. Since Mississippi Lu was so concerned about her precious disciple, he might have to make a trip to the Wu Kingdom. Of course, before leaving the capital, he had to solve all the remaining problems. To the Wu Kingdom? Mississippi Lu's beautiful eyes lit up. She asked, when? I was thinking of a month or two. Li Yi shook his head and said, but now? I'm not going. You. Mississippi Lu's face was filled with anger. The slender hand that was about to fall fiercely stopped in mid-air fell again. But this time, it was with a gentle force. A faint smile appeared on her face. She asked with concern, does it still hurt? Li Yi did not have the chance to enjoy Mississippi Lu's gentle massage. He jumped up from the bed and ran out of the door at an unbelievable speed. As he ran out, he grabbed Xiao Huan's melon seeds. He ate them while thinking. So gentle, so gentle. Mississippi Lu is crazy. She's really crazy, miss. When are we moving over? Miss, do you want me to help you pack? Miss, if we move over, what about Sister Ruoqing? Since elder Sister Ruoqing is going there, Xiao Zhu will also go there, right? Zheng Zumo, who was embroidering a wedding dress, raised her head and glanced at Xiao Chui, who was carrying a small bag and wandering in front of her for almost an hour. Zheng Zumo lowered her head again and said, if you really can't wait, move over first. Anyway, there are other maids in the manor. Xiao Chui hurriedly put down the small bundle and came over with a smile. How could Xiao Chui understand Miss better than the other maids? Of course, I want to be with Miss. Goddess Luo Shui waved her hand and said, stay away from me, you're blocking the light. After chasing Xiao Chui away, he lowered his head and looked at a pattern on the wedding dress. He stared blankly for a long time before a vexed expression appeared on his face. Oh no, I forgot what kind of needle technique to use on this piece. She put the wedding dress and the needle and thread aside and walked towards Ruoqing's room. She remembered that when she was teaching her yesterday, she had demonstrated the steps on another brocade handkerchief. During the day, there was usually no one in her room. Sometimes, there were too many things to do and she might not come back at night. She pushed open the door and very quickly found the brocade handkerchief on the table. She picked it up and looked at it for a while. Not long after, she remembered the steps and put the brocade handkerchief back. Just as she was about to leave, her footsteps suddenly stopped. She turned around and looked at the bed. On the bed, under the pillow, the corner of a book was exposed. She was startled. This was the booklet that was pressed under the pillow by elder Sister Ruoqing? For her to hide it like this, it must be something very important or private. Even if the two of them were very close, it would not be good to take it out and look at it when she was not around. She shook her head and walked in the direction of the door. When she walked to the door, her footsteps stopped again and she looked back at the bedside. How about just taking a look? She looked left and right, closed the door like a thief, and returned to the bedside. She carefully took out the booklet under the pillow. There were no words on the cover. She carefully flipped to the next page. The first year of Jinghe, the first day of the 7th month. It was indeed elder Sister Ruoqing's diary. She knew that Ruoqing had the habit of writing diaries since she was young. Although she did not write every day, she had accumulated a few thick books. At that time, she actually wanted to peek at elder Sister Ruoqing's little secrets. However, Ruoqing hid it very well. After a few unsuccessful attempts, she gave up. At this moment, although she was a little frightened, she was actually a little excited that her wish had been fulfilled. Her gaze quickly moved up. The first year of Jinghe, the first day of the 7th month. What happened in that year's 7th month? That sour scholar wrote a love poem for her and was chased out of the jade courtyard by her mother. This matter was actually written in by her. Ah, the matter of him secretly eating osmanthus cake. So it was at that time that she was discovered, Poem from Beyond the Heavens. What nameless scholar? It was clearly that annoying fellow. Mid-Autumn Festival, the matter on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, that fellow. She slowly flipped through the pages, and a smile appeared on her pretty face. These were all things that they had experienced together in the past. Now that she recalled it, those memories and feelings from that time would surge out from her mind. She murmured a few words. That annoying fellow, why is he everywhere? Even elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She lowered her head and continued to flip through the pages. As the pages turned, the smile on her face gradually froze and dissipated. Then, it became a little pale, and a deep sense of loss and confusion began to appear in her eyes. Wan Ruoqing walked into the courtyard and saw Xiao Chui sitting alone in the courtyard. She looked around and asked, Xiao Chui, where is Zuinmo? Xiao Chui was holding a triangular prism in her hand. After watching the sunlight pass through it, it became colorful. She was playing happily under the sun. Hearing Wan Ruoqing's voice, she put down the thing in her hand and stood up. She said, Elder sister Ruoqing is back. Miss was here just now. She should have returned to her room now. She looked back and saw Xing Zuinmo walking out of her room. She walked over and said, Miss, elder sister Ruoqing is back. Wan Ruoqing walked over and said with a smile, the fish he sent yesterday is said to be a tribute from the palace. It's a river fish without many bones. He was worried that they wouldn't know how to cook it, so he told me how to cook it. It's been hot these days. Although it's frozen, it's better to eat it as soon as possible. Lee is so good to Mississippi. He sends fish every few days. The tribute from the palace is really much more delicious than the ones in the market. Xiao Chui said with a smile. Seeing Xiao Zhu holding her treasure and looking it up and down, she immediately trotted over and said anxiously, This is a gift from Lee. Xiao Zhu curled her lips and walked around the stone table with her. So what if he gave it to you? Can't I play with it? Xiao Chui said with dissatisfaction, Lee gave it to me first. I haven't let you play with it yet. You are robbing me. Xiao Zhu stopped and looked at her. Are we still good sisters? Just let me play with it. Xiao Chui also stopped and hesitated. After a moment, she said, Okay, but after you play with it, you have to give it back to me. Wan Ruoqing looked at the door of her room and then at her. She asked in confusion, Why did you come out of my room? Zheng Zumo smiled and said, I'm stupid. I forgot the needle technique you taught me yesterday, so I went in and looked at it again. It's okay. If you forget, I will teach you again. A woman only gets married once in her life. The wedding dress must be embroidered well. You can't be careless. She smiled and said, Wait a moment. I will go to the room to get the needle and thread. Zheng Zumo nodded and walked to the stone table in a daze. Beside her, Xiao Chui looked at Xiao Zhu who was playing with the prism under the sun. She couldn't help but laugh. Stupid. You don't even know how to do such a simple thing. I will teach you. She looked at the two girls who were laughing and scolding each other, then looked at Wan Ruoqing who walked into the room. She felt that the wedding dress in her hand was a bit dazzling. Chapter 908. Sister Ruoqing's fish is so delicious. Xiao Chui put a mouthful of fish into her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim. Unlike her mistress, she didn't really like eating fish, but she always made an exception with Sister Ruoqing. If there was someone in this world who could cook as good as Li, it would definitely be Sister Ruoqing. Xiao Zhu pinched her face and said, You're the one who can eat the most. You can have the leftovers later. Looking at the two girls playing, Wan Ruoqing smiled and turned to look at Xing Zumo, who was holding a pair of chopsticks in her hand and stupidly putting the fish into her mouth but not chewing. She asked in confusion, Zumo, what's wrong? Is today's food not to your taste? Xing Zumo came back to her senses and shook her head. No, I just don't feel well. Wan Ruoqing put down her chopsticks and touched her forehead. She looked at her and shook her head. It's not hot, but you don't look well. I'll go find a doctor. No need, I'm just a bit tired. I'll be fine after eating and resting. Tsing Zumo shook her head again and said, Sister Ruoqing, I'm moving over soon. You should come with us. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and smiled. I won't be going. Xiao Zhu and I will move back to Willow Lane. We've lived there for a long time and are used to it. Tsing Zumo lowered her head and was silent for a while. She suddenly asked, if I take away something you like very much, what will Sister Ruoqing do? Wan Ruoqing was surprised. What thing? She looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes and said in a low voice, there's something that Sister Ruoqing likes very much. It's something that is very important to you. We both like it very much, but you liked it first. Wan Ruoqing smiled and put a piece of fish in her bowl. Take it if you like it. I don't have anything that I like very much or that's very important to me. What if it's that piece of paper with Immortal Magpie Bridge on it? Wan Ruoqing paused in the middle of taking back her chopsticks. Soon, she smiled and nodded. Sure, but I left it in the brothel. I'll bring it to you when I come back tonight. Under the dim candlelight, Wan Ruoqing spread out the yellowed paper. Some parts of the paper had already become tattered. She gently stroked the words on the paper with a faint smile on her face. She didn't know how much time had passed until the oil lamp lit up. She folded it again and walked out the door. She lowered her head and looked at the thing in her hand with some reluctance. Then she knocked on the door next door. The door opened very quickly, and Goddess Luo Shui walked out with sleepy eyes. She muttered, Sister Ruoqing, it's already so late. Why aren't you sleeping? Wan Ruoqing handed over the things in her hands. This is for you. She rubbed her eyes, took it with both hands, and asked doubtfully, what is it? The things you talked about during the day. She reached out to tidy up her messy hair and said, it's late. Go back to sleep. Tsing Zumo pulled her arm. I want you to talk to me. Before Wan Ruoqing could nod, she was dragged in and sat on the edge of the bed. Tsing Zumo hugged her arm and rested her head on her shoulder. She murmured, I don't want to leave you, you're about to get married, but you're still so childish, Sister Ruoqing, I'm sorry. She suddenly raised her head and looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes. I stole your favorite thing. Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, it should have been yours in the first place. What's mine is yours. What's mine is yours. After a moment of silence, Tsing Zumo suddenly smiled. She hugged her waist and said, hee, what I said today was all a lie. How could I steal something that my beloved Sister Ruoqing likes? Don't you like my poetry book very much? I'll give it to you, huh? Seeing her sudden change, Wan Ruoqing was dazed and looked at her with a confused expression. What are you talking about? She hugged Wan Ruoqing, and the two of them fell down together. Sleep. Wan Ruoqing struggled to get up. I'm going back to my room. She flipped over like a spoiled child and pressed Wan Ruoqing under her body. No, I want to sleep with you in my arms tonight, and in the future, you're about to get married. How can you? I don't care. I want in the future. I want forever, alright. If you say forever, then forever. Wan Ruoqing said helplessly. Then, her body stiffened. She blushed and whispered, sleep. Don't touch. Goddess Luo Shui grabbed her hand and put it on a soft spot on her body. She murmured, now we're even. Li looked at Mississippi Lu who was behind him helplessly and said, don't follow me. I've said it 10 times. When things in the capital are settled, I'll go with you. Why are you in such a hurry? Mississippi Lu asked lightly, what else do you have to deal with? The Chui family. If the Chui family doesn't fall, how can we leave in peace? It's not like you don't know what happened a while ago. This kind of person is insane and has no bottom line. He can do anything. You don't want the people and things related to us in the capital to be targeted by the Chui family after we leave, right? Mississippi Lu didn't ask him again this time. She turned around and walked outside. Li was stunned for a moment and asked, where are you going? Mississippi Lu replied lightly, I'll help you. Li grabbed Mississippi Lu's arm and pulled her back. He regretted telling her about it earlier. Fong stood not far away and watched the joke. Compared to Li Yi, who was having a headache, he was obviously in a much better mood. Recently, Fong could be said to be riding on the crest of success. When he spoke, his back was much straighter. Mrs. Fong and her sworn sister, Miss Xiao, had just come back from shopping. Fong was carrying a lot of bags of various sizes in his hands, but his face was full of bright smiles. Mississippi. Lu stopped and asked, "Do you feel that Uncle Fong is different from before?" Li Yi was surprised and asked, "What's the difference?" Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and said, "In the past, when he was with Mrs. Fong, he always looked sad. Recently, he has been smiling more and more." Li Yi sighed and said, "People are in high spirits when they encounter happy events. Let him be happy. I just learned 2 words yesterday, and they seem to say that you can't be too happy." Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, "When things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction. Extreme joy begets." What is it again? Extreme joy begets sorrow. Mississippi Lu glanced at him and said, "You don't need to remind me. I can also think of it." A strong man came from the front and greeted the two of them. "Young master." Second Mississippi, Li Yi nodded and asked, "It's old Sue. Didn't you go to Qing and Mansion to pick up mother-in-law?" "Where is mother-in-law?" Old Sue sighed and said, "As soon as I came to the capital, I was dragged to the streets by my mother-in-law. I didn't bring any money with me, so I came back to get some." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Go quickly. Remember to bring more." The strong man laughed and greeted the 2 people who were walking toward him. "Hello, sister-in-law." "Hello, Miss Hong." After saying that, he realized that something was not quite right. His eyes stared straight at the young girl beside Mrs. Fong. Mrs. Fong looked at him and asked with a puzzled expression, "Do you know my sister?" "I don't know her." "Sister-in-law, you go ahead. I have something to do, so I'll go back first." Old Sue shook his head with a firm expression and strode forward. Mrs. Fong turned around, looked at him, and shouted, "Stop right there." Crash. The strong man stopped in his tracks. Fong's face turned pale, and the big and small bags in his hands fell to the ground. "What's wrong with him?" Mississippi Lu looked at Li Yi and asked in confusion. Li Yi pressed one hand on his forehead and sighed. He said, "He's too happy. Extreme joy begets sorrow." Chapter 909. "Tell me, do you know the younger sister of the Xiao family?" Mrs. Fong looked at Old Sue and asked with an aggressive gaze. Old Sue secretly glanced at Fong. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He trembled and said, I. Mrs. Fong put her hands on her hips and said angrily, "You what? Tell me." Fong sighed. As soon as he took a step forward, he heard a sigh. The woman next to Mrs. Fong sighed and said, "Cousin, don't worry. I won't cause any trouble for your family. I'll go back in a few days." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present was dumbfounded. Old Fong pursed his lips in confusion, while Old Sue stood rooted to the ground in a daze. Mrs. Fong was the first to react. She pointed at Old Sue and asked the woman, "Sister, is he the distant cousin you mentioned?" The woman nodded and said, "If it weren't for the disaster in my hometown, Mrs. Fong was already furious. She pointed at Old Sue and scolded, "You heartless man. You forgot your poor relatives when you got rich. Sister, you'll stay with us from now on. We won't trouble this heartless guy." No matter how stupid Old Sue was, he still reacted at this moment. He smiled apologetically and said, "Sister-in-law, what are you talking about? Didn't I go to Qing and Prefecture recently? I just missed little Hong. Since I'm back, I naturally can't trouble you anymore." Mrs. Fong ignored her. She took her arm and said, "Let's go, sister. Ignore them. Let's go back and try on the new clothes." After saying that, she glanced at Fong and stopped in her tracks. She asked, "Why are you sweating so much?" Fong wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked up. He sighed and said, "The sun is so hot today. My eyes are sweating. Mississippi Lou looked away and said in surprise, I've been in the village for so many years. Why haven't I heard that old Sue has any distant cousins? Lee glanced at her and said, if he says he does, then he does. Why are you worrying about him? Mississippi Lou turned to look at him. Her expression did not change, but her grip on her sword tightened. Lee touched his forehead. I have to think carefully. When are we going to the Wu Kingdom to visit my martial nephew? Her chest heaved a few times, and a moment later, a forced smile appeared on her face. I'm going to the League to train the newbies. I'll be back later. The reason why the martial arts practitioners who joined the Lu League improved so quickly was that there were many masters in the league. After accumulating enough points, they could exchange for pointers from these masters. Of course, if these masters were in a good mood, they would also train the newcomers for free. Mississippi Lou was obviously in a bad mood. Although she did not know the reason, the newcomers in the league must be careful. When he was about to go out, a servant of the Li family came to report that Lord Lu of the Ministry of Justice had come to visit. Lu Yi had been investigating an important case recently, and he must have made some progress. He gave up the idea of going out, poured 2 cups of tea, and sat down in the hall. Lord Li, after Lu Yi came in, he first cupped his hands and bowed to him. At Li Yi's signal, he sat across from him. Li Yi raised his teacup and asked, has there been progress on that case? Lu Yi nodded. I've had people follow Qin Yu for the past few days. Lord Li's guess is correct. There is indeed something wrong with the Qin family. What did you find out? Outside the capital, a manor owned by the Qin family under Qin Yan's name. There are some problems. Lu Yi's eyes were sharp. The manor is heavily guarded. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in. It doesn't look like a private garden for recreation at all. Usually, the people who enter and leave the manor are the nobles of the capital. The more it is so, the more suspicious it is. Li Yi was surprised. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in? Although there were no masters of the Grandmaster level in the Secret Service, there were many guests who were only a step away from the Grandmaster level. If even the masters of the Secret Service couldn't sneak in, it could be seen how heavily guarded the manor was. In the entire capital, perhaps only the Imperial Palace and the Department of Heavenly Punishment could compare. Lu Yi shook his head. He thought of something and said, in the process of investigating Qin Yu, I discovered some suspicious points. What suspicious points? Lu Yi thought for a moment. Lord Li, do you know that a few years ago, Qin Yu raped his own aunt and committed the crime of incest, causing the capital to denounce him? Li Yi nodded. I heard that the woman he raped couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide. Later on, the Qin family suppressed the matter. Even though Prime Minister Qin is the current Minister of the Right, he has no way of influencing the people. How could the Qin family suppress the matter? Lu Yi shook his head and said, in this matter, the Chui family used the power of the King of Shu and countless dignitaries in the capital to suppress this rebellious matter. Even the Empress in the palace contributed a lot. Li Yi knew that Lu Yi would not bring up this matter for no reason, so he waited for him to continue. The woman he raped was named Lin Lian. Before entering the Qin family, she was a slightly famous actress in the capital. Later on, she caught the eye of Prime Minister Qin's 5th son, Qin He. Not long after he took her in as a concubine, that incident happened. Lin Lian is actually not the girl's real name. She was just a disciple of a performer with the surname Lin in the capital. She changed her surname after she became her master. That Lin Lian passed away a long time ago, and the disciples she took in her lifetime all had different experiences. That Miss Lin Lian is the oldest of her disciples and has inherited her acting skills. Her youngest disciple has completely inherited her skills in the art of the zither and has even surpassed her. She is extremely famous in the capital. Li Yi sighed and said, her youngest disciple, the girl with outstanding skills on the guqin, her stage name is Lin Shuangshuang, right? Lu Yi nodded and said, yes, it is the deceased Lin Shuangshuang. Lin Qin, who reported to the Ministry of Justice, is also their sister. The common people only know that Chu Ping killed Lin Shuangshuang, but they have overlooked one thing. Lin Shuangshuang was already seriously ill. Even without that incident, she only had a few months to live. Lu Yi shook his head and said, "This is not all suspicious." Official Zhang said that there was no such thing as a criminal. This matter was originally a trap set up by the Chui family for the Chu family. The Chui family bribed Lin Shuangshuang in advance, but their original intention was not to use Lin Shuangshuang's death to threaten the Chu family. That night, someone saw the fifth master of the Qin family, Qin He, in a restaurant across from the Fine Sound Pavilion drunk. Official Zheng once said that when there are too many coincidences, it is no longer a coincidence. Li Yi shook his head and said, "So this was not a trap set up by the Chui family for the Chu family." Lu Yi looked at him and nodded. This was a trap set up by someone for the Chui family and the Chu family. If the Chu family is crippled, the Chui family will lose an arm. Lu Yi put down his teacup and said, "Although Prime Minister Qin has not had much contact with the Chui family in this past year, the relationship between the two families cannot be severed. If something happens to the Qin family, the Chui family will really lose an arm." He raised his head and muttered, "This fifth master Qin, what does he want to do?" The Fong family. The wife of the Fong family and the girl walked into the house arm in arm. Fong came in carrying bags of various sizes. "Close the door," the wife of the Fong family suddenly said. "It's broad daylight, why close the door?" Fong muttered. He put down the things in his hands and closed the door. The wife of the Fong family let go of the girl's hand and looked at the two of them. With a cold expression, she asked, "When did you start?" Chapter 9-10. Fong's face changed. He raised his head and opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. When the woman heard this, her body trembled, and her face turned pale in an instant. She looked at Fong Lucier and said in panic, "Sister, don't." Fong Lucier waved her hand and said, "Don't call me that. I don't have a sister like you." Little Red's lips moved, but before she could say the next word, a mountain-like figure had already stood in front of her. Fong looked up at his wife and said in a low voice, "It's all my idea. Blame me." Fong Lucier pointed her finger at him and said in a trembling voice, You really have an affair." Fong Lucier was stunned and looked at her in disbelief. "You just tricked me." "Well, you're really capable." Fong Lucier picked up the broom on the side and fiercely whipped him. "You brought a fox spirit to our house, but you're still in the right, aren't you?" Little Red's eyes were full of tears. She desperately stood in front of Fong and cried, "Sister, don't hit Fong Lucier. If you want to hit him, hit me. It's all my fault. I seduced him." Fong Lucier's broom didn't fall. She collapsed on the ground and cried, "Why is my life so bitter? I can't live like this anymore." Fong Lucier's face showed a painful expression. He scratched his hair hard and then loosened it powerlessly. Li Yi and Lu Yi walked out of the mansion. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, "After all, it's a serious matter. If we don't have enough evidence, we can't do anything. I'll ask them to keep an eye on it and try to get some useful clues." "Don't bother." Li Yi waved to the sloppy old man not far away and said, "Su, I need your help with something. 10 drumsticks." The sloppy old man had recently understood that White Rabbit creamy candies was not a long-term solution. Under the influence of his second granduncle, he had a special liking for drumsticks. This was not the only thing he had learned from his second granduncle. Yesterday, he had even asked Li Yi to make him a rocking chair that was exactly the same as his second granduncle's. Li Yi nodded. "Deal." It was just cooking once. Xiao Huan's body was still growing during this period of time. She should eat more good food to nourish herself. After 2 years, it would be difficult to nourish herself again. The sloppy old man glanced at Louis Chang. "What are you waiting for? Let's go." Lu Yi looked at him. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "If there's anything, tell Su. You guys just have to wait for the news." Grandmasters could be said to be the pinnacle of martial artists. Ordinary martial artists could only be found but not sought after. Using them to gather information was definitely a waste of their talents. After sending them off, when he was about to walk back, he saw a figure squatting in the corner with his head buried between his knees. There was no sound at all. Li Yi looked around, walked over, and asked in confusion, "What's wrong now? Didn't you make it clear just now?" Fang raised his head and said in a hoarse voice, "Xiao Hong is gone." Li Yi was stunned. He looked at him and asked tentatively, "Your wife knows?" Fang nodded. Li Yi squatted down beside him and wanted to say some comforting words. When the words were about to come out, they only turned into a sigh. "Don't be anxious about this kind of thing. Let's take it slow." Fang raised his head and looked at him with burning eyes. He asked, "Young master, am I too much of a jerk?" After that, he lowered his head and shook his head. "No, I shouldn't ask you this question." The problem that Fang encountered could only be solved by himself. No one else could help or intervene. Li Yi's own affairs were even more complicated. They needed to be done step by step and could not be rushed. "Beast, he's a beast." The sloppy old man came in from outside angrily. Li Yi was worried that he would get angry and tear down the house. He hurriedly stood up and asked, "What happened?" The sloppy old man was still angry. "That place is a devil's den. I've lived for a long time, but I've never seen such a crazy person. The owner of that place should be killed by 1,000 cuts. If it weren't for Lu's repeated orders yesterday, I would have massacred that devil's den." Lu Yi followed behind and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency, it's almost certain that those missing women are related to the Qin family. The previous Ping family should have set up a trap for Chu Ping. That place is the root of evil." Li Yi looked at him. "That place and the Ping family," Lu Yi gritted his teeth. "It's the same place. I've already sent people to the Secret Intelligence Office to send more people. There's no time to lose. We need to act immediately." Lu Yi said a few words in a hurry. Someone from the Secret Intelligence Office came to report and left in a hurry. After the sloppy old man sat down, he gulped down a few mouthfuls of tea and recounted everything he had seen last night. The women tied up in the room were obviously different from the prostitutes outside. They no longer knew how to resist. Their eyes were empty and vacant, and they could only be manipulated. When the sloppy old man said this, he crushed 3 cups and smashed a wooden table. Li Yi had taken away the precious purple clay teapot in time to avoid this disaster. He shook his head and said, "The Secret Intelligence Office has already mobilized all their forces. Calm down and wait for the news." As soon as he finished speaking, Fang walked in from outside in a daze. He looked at Li Yi and said in a daze, "Young master, Little Red is missing." Li Yi said in surprise, "Missing? She didn't return to the Jade Courtyard?" Fang shook his head and said, "No, I asked the madam. She said that Little Red hasn't returned since she left last time." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked again, "What about Drunken Ink?" Fang looked anxious. "I went there too. Little Chui said she didn't go there either. She didn't go back last night. She didn't bring any money with her. She doesn't know anyone in the capital. Where could she go? Don't worry." Li Yi said as he walked out of the door, "Think about it first. Where else could she have gone? I'll ask the brothel and the government to inquire about the news." Outside the door, Fang Liusher's face was pale and her expression was extremely remorseful. Seeing Fang come out, she went to greet him and wanted to say something. But Fang just glanced at her and left in a hurry. In the Qin family, Qin Yan looked at his son who walked in from outside and asked with a sullen face, "You didn't return last night. What did you do?" "I went to find a friend to drink." "Qin, you look drunk." He shook his head and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back to my room first. I'm sleepy, bastard, this bastard." Qin Yan looked at his swaying back and forth as he left. He waved his hand and shook his head helplessly. Has everything been taken care of? Passing through a moon door, Qin Yu's drunkenness disappeared and he asked in a low voice. The person beside him immediately said, "Little Duke, don't worry. The person has been moved. This time, they'll definitely come empty-handed. A bunch of idiots. Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth and then a trace of coldness appeared on his face. He murmured, Li Yi, County Marquis Li, Dr. Li. I'll see how long you can be proud for. The coldness flashed across his face and he asked again, that woman last night. The person nodded repeatedly. She's been sent to your room. Qin Yu didn't speak again. He walked to the door and pushed it open. Seeing the empty room, his face instantly darkened. Where is she? Chapter 9-11. Little Red had disappeared. Not only had Li Yi made arrangements for the brothel, but he had also informed the county government and even the secret intelligence office. They had already acted quickly. All they could do now was wait. There was no news, but Lu Yi soon came. There's a traitor in the secret intelligence office. Lu Yi's face was as calm as still water. He said slowly, when we brought people there were no traces left. There were only a few servants of the Qin family, but they had something on them. After all, that was the house of an important official in the court. It's a bit troublesome. Li Yi looked at him and asked, You didn't find any clues at all? Lu Yi shook his head. One night is enough for them to move the people away. Other clues are not enough to be used as evidence. There are people watching the surroundings, and there are no suspicious people coming in or out. There should be a secret passage inside, but we have no reason to search it now. What about the traitor? Li Yi asked. He committed suicide. Lu Yi shook his head and said, That person has been in the secret intelligence office for nearly 20 years. When we found him, he bit the poison sac and didn't say a word. I see. Li Yi nodded and asked again, Do you know which family the carriages that go in and out usually belong to? There are records of them. Lu Yi replied, then raised his head and said, But sir, with just these, I'm afraid it's difficult to form evidence. Moreover, those people are all nobles in the capital, and their status is extraordinary. Li Yi waved his hand. These are enough. The secret intelligence office had a special status in the court, but it was still troublesome to encounter such things. Lu Yi would have a headache later. Breaking into a private house was not a big deal in other places, but this was the capital, and everything had to be done according to the law. Moreover, the court had changed the law not long ago against the opposition of countless nobles. If the court protected the secret intelligence office breaking into an official's house, it would undoubtedly be contradictory. It would give those people a reason, and maybe something more serious would happen. To be honest, even Li Yi himself didn't expect that they could plant people in the secret intelligence office. He had to admit that he had underestimated the Cui family. This time, Lu Yi had returned without any results. They would definitely be more careful and even stop all actions. If they wanted to collect evidence through normal channels, it would be very difficult. Crack. In the end, Li Yi did not manage to keep the teapot. You didn't find him? The sloppy old man slammed his palm on the new table, causing it to shatter. The teapot on top of it also fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. Are they messing with me? The anger on the sloppy old man's face didn't last long. He quickly revealed a smile, stroked his beard, and muttered, Interesting, interesting. How many years has it been since I've encountered something so interesting? The smile on his face was like that of a benevolent elder, but the servant girl who came in to clean up the mess couldn't help but shiver. She felt her body was a little cold, and her hands moved a little faster. Cui family. Cui Qingming sighed and said, What a pity. In the past 20 years, there was only one spy left in the secret intelligence office. Now, there's no one left. Someone beside him comforted, Second brother, there's no need to sigh. As the saying goes, there's no gain without loss. Although we've lost that spy, the secret intelligence office recklessly intruded into an official's residence. This is not a small crime. The imperial court has reformed the law, and it can't be overturned. With Lu Yi around, the Ministry of Justice is almost unable to interfere. If we get rid of him, it will be much more convenient to do things in the future. Cui Qingming nodded and said, let them be prepared. This time, if we don't pull Lu Yi down completely, we won't rest. The Cui clan hated Lu Yi to the bone. At that time, it was precisely because of Lu Yi's meddling that caused all their arrangements and deployments towards the Chu clan to turn into ash. The Chu clan had fallen, and the Cui clan had lost an arm. If this matter were to implicate the Qin clan and those people, then they would really arrive at the end of their rope. At this point, they almost understood that it was unlikely for His Majesty to summon the King of Shu back. But if the status quo was maintained, it might not be a bad thing for them. Once His Majesty passed away, who was more suitable than the King of Shu in terms of identity and status when the position of the Eastern Palace was vacant? If it really came to that, it would be much easier for them to do things. Cui Qingming showed a sarcastic smile and said, I really want to see with my own eyes what expression County Marquis Li has now. Li Yi was naturally anxious, but it was not because of the Secret Intelligence Office. As long as he knew the facts, the evidence was not important. What he was worried about was that if something really happened to Little Red, Old Fong's family would be ruined. However, the brothel and the government were not omnipotent. Even if they were to find clues, it would take time. Instead of searching around like a headless fly, it was better to wait here. Some people of the Cui family were also anxious. Little Duke, I've asked the front and back doors, and no strange woman came in or out. That woman must be hiding somewhere in the mansion. If you look hard, you can definitely find her. Qin Yu glanced at him coldly and said, go and look for her. Go and look for her in every room in the mansion. The servant was stunned and asked again, go and look for her in every room. Prime Minister and the masters, Qin Yu kicked him and said, except for those few, don't let anyone go. In a remote and messy woodshed in Qin's mansion, a woman looked at the figure covered in a black cloak and said gratefully, thank you for saving me, my benefactor. Little Red, why are you here? A hoarse voice came from the black cloak, and it was not difficult to tell that it was a woman's voice. I was caught by them, the woman replied. Then she realized something and asked in shock, how do you know my name is Little Red? The person in the black cloak put down the hood of her cloak. It was an ordinary-looking woman, but there was a long scar on her face, which looked a little scary. The woman looked at her and said, I went down the mountain with Uncle Fong and saw you on the road. Little Red's expression was a little excited. She grabbed her sleeve and asked, You know Big Brother Fong? The woman with the long scar on her face did not answer this question. Instead, she looked at her and said, this place is very remote. They can't find this place. You hide here first. I'll think of a way to spread the news. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a sudden urgent knock on the door. The woman's expression changed. She hurriedly let Little Red hide in a large vat and threw her black cloak inside. She carried a bundle of firewood and walked to the door. She asked, who is it? The firewood is not ready yet. Wait a moment, a rough voice came from outside the door, open the door. The community sends warmth. Chapter 9:12. Hearing the voice outside, the woman with the scar on her face calmed down a bit and asked, Wu, Brother Wu? It's me, Xiao Mei. Open the door. There's not enough time. Wu Er's voice came from outside. Lu Mei opened the door and looked at the man outside. She asked in confusion, what's not enough time? There's not enough time to explain. Wu Er closed the door and said, hurry and call the girl out. Those people are coming. As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of messy footsteps could be heard. Lu Mei's expression changed greatly. Wu Er closed the door and grabbed her arm. He said in a low voice, let's go. I'll tell you in detail later. Search. A group of Qin family guards kicked open the door of the woodshed and searched inside and out. They also looked at the woodpile, water tanks, and other places where people could hide, but they didn't find anything. The leader waved his hand and said, search other places. Qin Manor, back residence. Wu Er led the two of them through the narrow path between the rock garden and the wall. Lu Mei hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask, "Brother Wu, how did you know? Now is not the time to talk about this." Wu Er quickly said, "They are searching the entire Qin manor. It's not safe to hide there. I'll take you to a safe place." Xiao Hong followed and said in a weak voice, "Thank you, big brother." "No need to thank me." Wu Er smiled and said, "If you want to thank someone, thank Fifth Lord. Otherwise, such a beautiful girl would have been defiled by that beast Qin Yu again." The three of them were in a deserted garden in the Qin family. The weeds were as tall as a person and they followed the narrow path between the rock garden. They didn't encounter anyone along the way. Somewhere, Wu Er pushed open a small door. After the three of them walked in and closed it from the inside, he let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Okay, we're safe now." The small door was clearly the back door of a house. Wu Er took the two of them to the front yard. A middle-aged man was already standing there waiting. Wu Er walked over and said with a smile, "Fifth Lord, I've brought the girl." Fifth Lord nodded and looked at the girl. "I'm afraid it's not easy to send you out from here. Do you have any family in the capital?" Xiao Hong thought for a moment and was about to speak. She paused and said after a long time, "Just tell the Madam of Jade Courtyard that I'm here and she will know what to do." Fifth Lord shook his head and said, "If that's all, I'm afraid it won't work. Miss doesn't know where this place is. Open the door, open the door." Suddenly, the sound of knocking came from outside the courtyard. The knocking was so forceful that it seemed like the entire door was going to crack. Qin Clan's fifth master glanced at Wu Er, who immediately understood. He walked over and whispered, "Follow me." The fifth master of the Qin family walked to the door and opened it. He asked, "Why did you use so much force?" Fifth Lord, the head guard, first casually greeted him and said, "A servant girl in the mansion ran away, and now the whole mansion is being searched. Of course, we are not suspecting Fifth Lord, but just doing a routine search." "Fifth Lord, you don't mind, right?" The fifth master of the Qin family waved his hand and said, "Go ahead. Be careful and don't break anything." They swaggered in. The fifth master of the Qin family stood in the yard and watched them rummaging in the yard. When they went back into the house, he hurriedly followed them and said, "Be careful. If you break anything, you can't afford to pay for it." They didn't dare to be too arrogant. After searching for a while, the leader knocked on a wall on the inside and pushed it hard. He asked, "There won't be a secret door here, right?" Fifth Master Qin smiled. "How could it be?" Unable to find anything here, the guard waved his hand. "Let's go to the next place." Fifth Master Qin followed them out. After closing the door, he walked back. He knocked on the wall that the guard had pushed 3 times, paused for a moment, and then hurriedly knocked 3 more times. A moment later, a heavy sound came from behind the wall, and the wall slowly turned to an angle. Wu Er came out from behind the wall, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and complained, "Fifth Master, this wall really needs to be repaired. It's so hard to switch it on and off." Fifth Master Qin waved his hand and said, "Sit down and rest for a while." Wu Er sat down at the table, picked up a teapot, and gulped down a mouthful of tea. Then he asked, "Fifth Master, we saved Miss Hong. What should we do now? It's impossible for us to send her out alone." Fifth Master Qin shook his head, looked at him, and said, "Go find this girl's family and report it to the authorities." "Ah." Wu Er was stunned and said, "Report to the authorities? But Fifth Master, this is the Qin family. We should have a bottom line." Fifth Master Qin looked at him, shook his head, and said, "What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. This has nothing to do with whether I'm a member of the Qin family or not. Fifth Master, you." Wu Er stood up with a solemn expression. He bowed to him and said, "You're really a good person." "It's just for justice." Wu Er nodded and asked, "Which official should I report to? The capital magistrate or the capital governor?" Fifth Master Qin looked at him, smiled, and said, "Report whichever one you like. I believe you know what to do." Wu Er patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, Fifth Master. I won't let you down." Wu Er strode out. Fifth Master Qin looked at the two of them and said, "I'm afraid you'll have to suffer for a while." The two women thanked him repeatedly. Fifth Master Qin looked behind him and saw that the gambling wall was still tilted. He walked over and shook his head, saying, "This Wu Er is always careless and forgets to close it again." He stretched out a hand and closed the wall until it was seamless. Then he walked over, looked at the two women, smiled, and said, "It's still early. What do you want to drink, tea or something else? The county government or the prefecture government?" On a street somewhere in the capital, Wu Er looked up, murmured, and stepped into a mansion. He said to the guard at the door, "Find Lord Li, in the courtyard of the Li mansion." Fong Lucier looked at Fong with a regretful expression. "It's all my fault. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have left." Fong squatted on the ground, sighed, and shook his head, saying, "It's not your fault. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have hidden it from you." Fong Lucier lowered her head and said, If she can come back, you can, do whatever you want." If he had heard this earlier, he would have been extremely excited, but at this moment, he couldn't bring himself to think about it at all. "Hey, Fong, long time no see." A figure came in from outside and looked at Fong. He first greeted him with a smile, and then asked, "Is Lord Li here?" Fong waved his hand and said in a hoarse voice, "Inside." Hearing the voice outside, Li Yi had already come out. When he saw Wu Er, he asked in surprise, "Why are you here?" "I'm here to report a case." Wu Er touched his head and said with a smile, "Qin, you took a girl back. Fifth Master and I secretly saved her. We couldn't send her out, so Fifth Master asked me to come out and report the case." "Took a girl?" "Yes." Wu Er nodded and said, "This time the evidence is conclusive. He can't run away. But we still have to go to the Jade Courtyard. The girl said that only the Madam of the Jade Courtyard can report the case." "The Madam of the Jade Courtyard." Fong's body trembled. He suddenly got up and ran over quickly. He grabbed Wu Er's arm and asked, "What's the name of the girl you mentioned?" Wu Er scratched his head. I think her name is Xiaohong." The tight string in Fong's heart finally loosened, and he slumped to the ground. When Fong Lucier hurried to help him, he seemed to remember something and asked, "What did you say just now?" "If Xiaohong can come back." Fong Lucier looked puzzled. "What did I say just now?" Chapter 9:13. Yesterday, the Secret Intelligence Division broke into an official's residence. Today, there were many impeachment memorials. This organization had always had a mixed reputation. At a critical moment, there was no lack of people hitting someone when they were down. The court was in turmoil. Even if there were clues, they couldn't break into the minister's residence again. After the capital's magistrate, Lu Dio, received the report from the Madam of the Jade Courtyard, he considered the special nature of this case and asked the princess as quickly as possible. After receiving the order to search the Qin manor, he rushed over with the bailiffs of the county yamen. Among the many bailiffs, the person leading them was a burly man. His face was filled with anxiety as he urged the bailiffs to hurry up. Li Manor. Wu Er scratched his head and said to Li Yi, "My lord, if there's nothing else, I'll be going back first." Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "How did Qin he know that Qin you captured a girl and brought her into the manor?" "I don't know either." Wu Er shook his head and said, "Fifth Lord only told me to save Xiaomei and that girl. I don't know how Fifth Lord found out about this." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I'm afraid he already knows about you. You don't need to go back. Haven't you always wanted to go to the Lumeng? You can go there now." Wu Er smiled and said, "There's no hurry. I still want to go back. Maybe I can be of some use." Li Yi hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Next, there may be some unrest in the Qin family. Be careful." "I know." Wu Er nodded. "I'll be going back first." In front of the Qin manor, Lu Dio politely bowed to Qin Yan and said, "This is an important matter. This official has already asked the princess. Please cooperate, Milord Qin. Qin Yan's expression was unsightly as he questioned. Yesterday, the Secret Intelligence Division barged into the Qin residence, but Lord Lu actually brought bailiffs here today to arrest people. What kind of place do you think the Qin residence is? Is it a place that you can enter and search as you please? The expression on Lu Daio's face was very polite. He said again, there are witnesses who saw that after the young lady was kidnapped, she entered the backyard of Qin Manor. It's not that I don't believe you, Lord Qin, but this case is really too important. It's also related to another big case that even His Majesty is very concerned about. I really have no choice but to do this. Let them search. Qin Yan wanted to say something else, but an elderly voice came from behind him. Qin Xiang waved his hand. There was no joy or anger on his face. Since it wasn't done by the Qin family, what harm is there in searching? But, if we let them enter, where would the face of my Qin family be? He retorted. Seeing that Qin Xiang's face was still expressionless, he gloomily looked at Lu Daio and said, Lord Lu, this official can let you in. If you can find that woman in my Qin residence today, I, Qin Yan, have nothing to say. If you can't find her, then tomorrow in court, Lord Lu will have already prepared an excuse. Thank you, Lord Qin. Lu Daio cupped his hands and turned his head to order. This is the Qin residence. You can search, but do not act rashly. Under the lead of the large man, more than 10 bailiffs filed in. Trash, how could there not be? Could it be that she can grow wings and fly out of the residence? Qin Yu's face was gloomy as he coldly asked. A Qin family servant shivered and said, Little High Duke, other than the Prime Minister's room, we've already searched the entire Qin residence, inside and out. We really haven't found that woman. It's possible that she really has escaped. Escaped? What do you think this Qin residence is? Qin Yu suddenly threw the teacup over. The servant let the teacup hit his head and didn't dare to dodge. He didn't even dare to wipe the blood that flowed down. At this time, another person ran in from outside in a panic and said in panic, Little High Duke, it's bad. The government has come to the Qin residence to search. They said that we've captured a woman. Qin Yu coldly glanced at that person. When you captured her yesterday, did someone see you? That person's expression changed. No. Qin Yu thought for a moment, waved his hand, and said, If they want to search, then let them search. The Qin family servant raised his head and asked carefully, Little High Duke, what if they really find her? Qin Yu looked at him coldly. If they really find her, I'll chop you up and feed you to the dogs. Wu Er hurriedly walked into the room and said, Fifth Master, the capital magistrate has brought people over. Fifth Master Qin glanced at him and asked, Why are you back? Wu Er said in surprise, I came back after reporting to the government. Where else can I go? Fifth Master Qin's gaze stayed on his face for a moment and said, Forget it, it's not important. The two girls have gone out from the back door. The county government's bailiffs will find them. He clasped his hands behind his back and walked out of the courtyard. Wu Er asked in surprise, Fifth Master, where are you going? Going out for a walk. Fifth Master Qin didn't look back but waved his hand behind him. I'll walk alone. You don't have to follow me this time. Wu Er stopped. After touching his head, he nodded and said, Okay. The bailiffs searched carefully in Qin's mansion. They were very patient in the face of some uncooperative people. After all, this was Qin's mansion. Even if Lord Lu didn't specifically instruct them, they didn't dare to act rashly. However, many servants of Qin's mansion looked at them from a distance, pointing at the group of people and talking. Wu Er walked over leisurely with his hands behind his back. He pointed at the bailiffs and said, This is the yard of the second master. How can there be people hiding here? Be careful. Don't break anything. You can't afford to pay for it. The leading man's face darkened. He pointed in a direction and said, Go over there and find them. Over there. That's the residence of the third master. The third master is a fifth-level official in the imperial court. He's very honest. It's impossible for him to hide people. Go over there, that's the residence of the servants. You can go if you want. Anyway, I don't think it's a good place to hide people. The leading man looked back at him and asked, then where do you think it's a good place to hide people? Wu Er shook his head and glanced in a certain direction. Then how do I know? The leading man pointed at that place and asked, what's that place? That place. Wu Er glanced at it and shook his head. I don't know. After saying that, he walked away leisurely. The leading man suddenly waved his hand and pointed in that direction. Search. In a deserted garden in the backyard of Qin's mansion, the bailiffs found two women behind a rockery. When one of the women saw the man dressed as a bailiff, her face lit up with joy. She took 2 quick steps forward and then stopped. She knelt on the ground and said in a loud voice, Your Excellency, you must seek justice for me. Seeing this scene, the expressions of the people of Qin's family who followed them changed greatly. Some people in the distance looked even more frightened. They had searched this place many times just now. There was no one at all. Little Duke, it's bad. They found the woman in the backyard. A servant of Qin's family rushed into Qin Yu's residence and said in a panic. Qin Yu clenched his fists and his face was extremely gloomy. The servant said anxiously, Little Duke, it's better to hide first. You won't be able to leave in a while. Qin Yu looked outside, loosened his clenched fists, and turned into the backyard. In the capital, when night gradually fell, a dry well in the courtyard of a house 2 streets away from Qin's mansion suddenly lit up with a faint light. The rope tied to a tree outside the well swayed for a long time before a figure climbed out of the well with difficulty. He looked back at the well and said in a low voice, Hurry up. Take advantage of the darkness to go to the Chui family. In the courtyard, a figure who had been sitting for a long time sighed. Why did you come so late? I've been waiting for you for a long time. Qin Yu suddenly turned his head. Who is it? He only saw a vague figure in the darkness and suddenly felt a pain in his neck. His whole body weakly fell to the ground. Chapter 9:14. Qin Manor. All of the Qin family's servants temporarily stopped what they were doing. They were absent-minded and would occasionally look in a certain direction in the manor. In a very spacious hall, Qin Xiang looked at the young woman in the hall and said in a deep voice, Where is he? A servant of the Qin manor walked in from outside and said respectfully, replying to the Prime Minister, The young Duke is not in the room. Lu Dao bowed to Prime Minister Qin and turned to look at Qin Yan. He cupped his hands and said, Sir Qin, this young Duke Qin forcefully kidnapped a civilian girl. Qin Yan's face was gloomy and he said coldly, Sir Lu, you should be careful with your words. Although our court does not use words to convict people, before the matter is clear, it is best not to speak carelessly. After Qin Yan finished speaking, he looked at the woman and asked with a gloomy expression, You said that you were kidnapped and sent here? The man who looked like a bailiff frowned and took half a step forward, but he was stopped by Lu Dao. The woman nodded and said, Yes. Qin Yan asked again, Then how did you escape the room? The woman opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, a silhouette stepped out from behind her. The woman with a scar on her face stared straight at Qin Yan as she spoke. I heard this young lady calling for help in her room, so I secretly let her out. Qin Yan frowned. You what you? The man finally couldn't take it anymore. He took a step forward and said, The witness and material evidence are conclusive. Do you still want to deny it? You are. Just as Qin Yan's anger rose, he was interrupted by Lu Dao. County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, The country has its laws. The young duke forcefully kidnapped a civilian girl. This is an established fact. Her Highness the Princess has ordered this case to be investigated strictly. I hope that Sir Qin will not hide the information about the young duke. Qin Yan impatiently shook his head. I don't know where he is. This official is just reminding you. County Magistrate Lu smiled and respectfully bowed to Prime Minister Qin before saying, Let's go, wait a moment. Qin Yan stretched out his hand and pointed at the woman with a scar on her face. He said, She's a maidservant of my Qin clan. Lord Lu, are you taking her away as well? Lu Dao shook his head and said, What are you talking about, Mr. Qin? This girl is the key to this case. Of course, we have to take her with us. Qin Yan glared fiercely at the woman, but in the end, he didn't make any further movements to stop her. Qin Xiang held his forehead and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes and muttered, This bastard, this bastard. Qin Yan clenched his fists and walked to the door. He looked at a servant of the Qin clan and asked in a low voice, Where is that unfilial son? The man said in a low voice, They left through the secret passage. Qin Yan lowered his voice and said, Tell him to stay outside during this period of time. Don't come back. Although similar cases had occurred in the past, times had changed. The new system of the imperial court had just been established, and it was time for them to enforce the law. If they were caught, the punishment would not be light. In the distance, he saw a person walk over. With a dark expression, he asked, Where did you go this time? The Qin clan's fifth master, who reeked of alcohol and his clothes in disarray, cut a sorry figure, walked over. He looked around and asked, Just now, I saw an official leave. Did something happen? As he spoke, the smell of alcohol filled the air. Qin Yan took a step back in disgust and asked, How did you end up like this again? You've lost all the face of the Qin clan. The Qin clan's fifth master waved his hand and said, On the way back, I met a mad dog. As a member of the Qin clan, I obviously couldn't allow it to randomly bite me. Wouldn't that be losing face for the Qin clan? So, I broke its 5 legs and broke its teeth. Nonsense. Qin Yan waved his hand in extreme disgust. Someone, bring him back to the room. A sturdy figure hurriedly ran over and supported the Qin clan's fifth master with practiced ease. As they walked back, he said in a small voice, Fifth master is really drunk. How can a dog have 5 legs? The Qin clan's fifth master shook his head and countered, You have 3 legs, why can't a dog have 5? It's all my fault. I've wronged you, it's not big sister's fault. I was careless, you're still willing to call me sister? I'm the one who doesn't deserve to be your sister. After apologizing to each other, the 2 women hugged each other and cried. Fong, on the other hand, was full of smiles. His smile was so wide that it almost reached his eyebrows. Li Yi looked at the back corner. The lady who had not raised her head since she walked in, pulled Xiao Huan's sleeve, signaling to her. The servant girl immediately understood. She slowly walked over and looked at the woman with a scar on her face. She pulled the woman's hand and whispered, Sister Lu Mei, come in. The eldest miss and the second miss are inside, son-in-law, of course I know this. Fong patted his chest and said, Even though Lu Lao-san is not a good person, I am indebted to Xiao Mei. In the future, I will treat her as my daughter. Li Yi shook his head and said, You treat her as your daughter. She treats Xiao Hong as her sister. You treat Xiao Hong as, you are the one who is not a good person. Fong ran away with a red face. Lu Dao walked over and shook his head, saying, Master Li, Qin Yu ran away. I'm afraid it won't be easy to catch him. Kidnapping a commoner girl is not a small matter, but it's not a big matter either. Moreover, it didn't lead to a tragedy. I'm afraid the Qin family won't be touched. Who said I was going to touch the Qin family? Li Yi shook his head and looked at Fong, who was being lovingly beaten by Fong's wife. He said, It's good that he's fine. As for the other things, we can take it slow. What do you mean by it's not a big matter, but it's not a small matter? The sloppy old man frowned, looked at Lu Dao, and asked, Do you know what that place looks like? What that bastard committed was more than just kidnapping a commoner girl. If he hadn't run fast, this old man would have let him see all kinds of strange martial arts in this world, so that his life wouldn't have been in vain. The sloppy old man was very excited and angry. Li Yi could understand. This time, he was really made a fool of. If he couldn't get back at them, he was afraid that it would be difficult to untie the knot in his heart. Maybe even his heart of martial arts would be affected. Li Yi looked at him and said, Su, don't be excited. Don't worry, I promise to find out this matter soon. When the time comes, I will let you do it yourself. Those who should be punished will not be spared. A worried look appeared on County Magistrate Lu's face. He said, with such a thing happening to the Qin family, I'm afraid that very few people will impeach Louis. It's best to let him investigate this matter. However, last time, we alerted the enemy. I'm afraid it won't be easy to investigate again. Li Yi shook his head and said, in the morning assembly tomorrow, Lord Lu will impeach Louis in front of all the officials. He used his identity as a spy to break into an official's house and was lawless. Ah! County Magistrate Lu was stunned and couldn't believe his ears. Forget it, your identity is not suitable. Li Yi thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, let's change it to Lord Zheng. When Lord Lu goes back, please go to the capital governor's mansion. County Magistrate Lu thought for a moment and asked doubtfully, Lord Li, forgive this lowly official for being slow-witted. But why do we impeach Louis? Lord Lu is very careful. After Lord Zheng impeaches Louis. Li Yi looked at Lu Dao and said, Lord Lu, please write down the names of those who follow the trend. Chapter 9:15. Lu Dao gazed at Li Yi in a daze for a long time. Only then did he raise his hands in a somewhat ashamed gesture and say, Sir is wise. The actions of the county government were completely unconcealed. The matter of the Duke of Qin forcefully abducting a woman and fleeing to escape punishment quickly spread throughout Jingdo. This was not the first time the Duke had done such a despicable thing. He had done many more shameless things before, but by relying on his powerful background, he was able to settle them all. However, that was then and this was now. Recently, it was a special time. Let alone the Duke, even if it was a prince committing a crime, it had to be tried according to the rules. Otherwise, the court, which had just reformed the law, would be slapping itself in the face. Countless people were waiting to see them make a fool of themselves. Of course, no law could be changed overnight. Perhaps the Qin family would be condemned by public opinion, but it would not be able to harm their foundation. Although the people were helpless, they could only accept this reality. The Cui family. Qin Yan gazed at Cui Qingming with a face full of surprise and asked, he hasn't come to the Cui family? Cui Qingming shook his head and said, earlier, he only sent someone to tell me about the secret intelligence office. He didn't come tonight. He then shook his head and said, today is different from the past. He really should be more careful. If he is caught by the government, it will be troublesome. After this incident, I will let him stay at home peacefully for a period of time. When His Highness the King of Shu returns, everything will be settled. Qin Yan sighed and said, I'll go to the other families to see. If this unfilial son isn't in the Cui family, where can he hide? After Qin Yan left, a person walked up to Cui Qingming and said in a small voice, the matter of Qin Yu is only a small matter. Its influence is limited. I'm just afraid that once they catch Qin Yu and dig out some other things from his mouth, things will be very bad. Cui Qingming thought about it and waved his hand. Even if they really dig it out, what can they do? If they really have the guts to dig it out, there's no harm in helping them. The middle-aged man beside him paused and seemed to realize something. He then smiled and said, second brother is right. Even if they have the guts, they don't have the strength. Late at night, Qin Yan dragged his tired body back to the Qin manor. His expression was dark as he muttered to himself, just where did this unfilial son go? It was rare for Li Yi to wake up early today. In fact, there would always be 1 or 2 days a month when he had to wake up early. Not only was he tortured by Li Duan, but Mississippi Lu had also pestered him to study with her until midnight last night. He was severely lacking in sleep. Before the old emperor arrived, he wanted to lean against a pillar and take a nap. However, a fly kept buzzing in his ears, and he couldn't chase it away no matter how hard he tried. Li Xian frowned and said, what's going on with Louis? Isn't he usually very cautious? Why is he so reckless this time? When I came over just now, I heard a lot of people talking about him in front of His Majesty. Li Yi struggled to open his eyes and said weakly, fine. don't talk. The court is about to begin. Let me sleep for a while. Li Xian looked at him and asked in surprise, what's wrong with you? Why do you look so listless? Li Yi glanced at him and said, if you had an energetic wife or sister, she wouldn't be much better than me. The surprise on Li Xian's face turned into shock. He asked in a low voice, you've already taken her down? Before Li Yi could understand what he was saying, a eunuch announced in a sharp voice that His Majesty had arrived. When the old emperor went to court, he needed 2 eunuchs to support him. The eldest princess sat on the lower right side of the emperor. The officials greeted her one after another. My ministers, what important matter do you have to report to me today? He looked down at the people below. His voice was still calm, but it didn't have the same imposing manner as before. In the main hall, Cui Qingming met the eyes of several people and nodded slightly. One of them was about to step forward, but someone else in front of him stepped forward before him. Cui Qingming's eyes narrowed as he looked at the figure in front of the hall. The capital governor, Tsing Shichen, bowed and said, Your Majesty, I accuse the Assistant Minister of Justice, Liu Yi. Relying on Your Majesty's favor, he disregarded the law and brought people from the secret bureau to break into the official residence. Cui Qingming was startled, and some doubt appeared on his face. Tsing Shichen actually wanted to impeach Liu Yi. Could it be that he had guessed wrong? However, this wasn't the time to think about these things. He signaled with his eyes, and a few more people stepped forward. I accuse the Assistant Minister of Justice, Liu Yi. I second that. For a moment, Lord Liu Yi, who had risen from a small bailiff to the position of Assistant Minister of Justice in the past 2 years, became the target of public criticism. People kept stepping forward to impeach him, but the reasons for the impeachment weren't exactly the same. Behind the crowd, a gaze swept across the people who stepped forward one by one. It swept back and forth a few times before he took out a brush from his sleeve and began to write on the ceremonial tablet. The people stepped forward one by one in an orderly manner. At some point, a white-haired old man stepped forward. It's Lord Zhao. Even Lord Zhao can't stand the actions of the Secret Intelligence Bureau. Although the old man's official position wasn't prominent, he was known for his knowledge and had many students. Of course, the most important thing was that he was old enough to speak freely in the court. I accuse the Women's College of misleading the students. They actually spread the fallacy that parents with single eyelids cannot have children with double eyelids. This is completely unsubstantiated. Lord Zhao's words confused all the court officials in the hall. Wasn't everyone criticizing Liu Yi just now? The atmosphere was unprecedentedly high. If they put in more effort, they might be able to pull him down from the position of Assistant Minister of Justice. Had Lord Zhao gone senile? Why did he run out at this time to join in the fun? The court officials didn't care. The ceremonial tablet in the hands of the capital magistrate Lu Dio fell to the ground, and he hurriedly picked it up. Li Xian's mouth was wide open, and his face was full of horror. Li Yi opened his eyes, and he was no longer sleepy. In the main hall, there was no expression on Emperor Jing's face. Below him, the eldest princess, who had always been as still as a mountain, had the beads hanging from the phoenix crown on her head shake. Lord Zhao's interruption was very untimely. It was very likely that he would change the topic and cause His Majesty to overlook Liu Yi's crimes. Some people began to suspect that Lord Zhao, who had always taken a clear stand, had gone senile or had betrayed them. But at the moment, this was not important. Soon, someone stood up and continued the previous topic. He bowed and said, Your Majesty, in the past 2 years, the Secret Bureau has relied on Your Majesty's favor and has become more and more lawless. If we don't control it, I'm afraid it will be detrimental to the court. Everyone ignored Lord Zhao and brought the topic back. Lord Zhao originally wanted to say something, but after hearing a few whispers from the people beside him, he had no choice but to give up. So many people in the court had stood up one after another. Even the emperor couldn't ignore the opinions of so many people. Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and said, Since there are so many people impeaching, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Liu Yi, will temporarily suspend the matters at hand. The matter of the Secret Bureau breaking into the official residence will be handed over to the Supreme Court for trial. After dealing with the Secret Bureau case, the court officials didn't have many important things to report. After the eunuch announced the dismissal of the court, Li Yi felt relieved and slowly walked outside with Li Xian. County Marquis Li, Crown Prince. A eunuch quickly walked over from behind and said, "His Majesty has summoned you. Please move to the Hall of Diligent Government." You're tuning in to the Journey of the Soul YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.